This is the Joint Committees of Finance and Commerce Economic Development. My name is Councilmember Derek Green. I am the Chair of the Finance Committee, joined by my colleague, Councilmember Mark Squilla, Chair of the Commerce Economic Development Committee. I understand that state law currently requires that the following announcement be made at the beginning of every remote public hearing as follows. Due to the current public health emergency, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We're using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, Inquirer, and Legal Intelligentsia prior to the hearings, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I note that the hour has come. Mr. Iannuzzi, will you please call the roll, take attendance? Members that are in attendance will please indicate that you are present when your name is called. Also, please say a few brief words when responding so that your image will be displayed on screen when you speak.
Councilmember Kendra Brooks. Councilmember Alan Dom.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone has a great day today.
Councilmember Jamie Gauthier.
Can't hear Jamie.
Sorry. Good morning, everyone. Present.
Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Good morning. I'm here. Thank you.
Councilmember Helen Gim.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, colleagues.
Councilmember Curtis Jones Jr.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and in the spirit of civility, how are you?
Councilmember Maria Cañona Sanchez.
Buenos días, buenos días, buenos días.
Co-Chair Squilla.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and colleagues.
And Co-Chair Green.
I am present. Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. A quorum of the committees is present, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the public hearing of the Joint Committees on Finance and Commerce Economic Development regarding Bill number 200336. Mr. Iannuzzi, will you please read the title of the resolution?
Resolution number 200336, resolution authorizing the Committee on Finance and on Commerce and Economic Development to hold joint hearings regarding Philadelphia's safe, equitable, and robust economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic.
Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. Before we begin to hear testimony from the witnesses that we have here today, everyone who has been invited to the meeting to testify should be aware that a public hearing is being recorded. Because the hearing is public, participants and viewers have no reasonable expectation of privacy. By continuing to be in the hearing, you're consenting to be recorded. I also would like to note that Councilmember Kendra Brooks is also present for this morning's hearing. Additionally, prior to recognizing members for the questions and comments they have for witnesses, I will note for the record at this time that we will use the chat feature available in Microsoft Teams to allow members to signify that they wish to be recognized. In order to comply with the Sunshine Act, the chat feature must only be used for this purpose. Before we call the first panel, would my co-chair, Councilmember Squilla, like to make any opening comments? Hearing no comments from Councilmember Squilla, I'd just like to say for the purpose of this hearing, this is a continuation of this conversation that we started over the summer. We all know that COVID-19 has been a global pandemic, but in addition to being a global pandemic, it has been an economic crisis that has devastated businesses around the nation, the Commonwealth, and in particular the city of Philadelphia, especially so many of our small businesses on commercial corridors from Washington Lane to Washington Avenue. And so this hearing is to talk about some of the initiatives that have been taken to address those issues and concerns. I know the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce has tasked a recovery task force to look at various industries and various subcommittees to talk about how we can be not only be on the defensive and try to help support the city of Philadelphia, but also the offensive in trying to look at opportunities to grow the city. In addition, our community development financial institutions have taken a lot of work and taken a lot of resources to try to help small businesses, especially those neighborhood commercial businesses that we talked about. And we'll hear from organizations that have been doing a yeoman's job to address and help small businesses. And then finally, we'll also hear from our Commerce Department as well as from PIDC about the initiatives that they've been doing regarding this issue. I do have a concern that as we go into the fall months, when we have less daylight, how will we continue to grow our economy in spite of COVID, which has been just a catastrophe in so many aspects. And the goal of this conversation is to see what additional steps that we can take as a city and continue to move forward in all facets and capacities that we can to enhance and support our business community, especially our neighbor small businesses that have been critically impacted by this pandemic. With that, Mr. Iannuzi, will you please call the first panel of witnesses we have testified this morning?
James Burnett, Executive Director, WPFSI. Dan Betancourt, President and CEO of Community First Fund.
Thank you, Mr. Iannuzi. If both of the witnesses could state your name for the record and then proceed with your testimony.
Yes, Councilman, Chairman Green. Jim Burnett, Executive Director for West Philadelphia Financial Services Institution.
And Dan Betancourt, President, Community First Fund.
Again, good morning, Chairman Green, Chairman Squilla, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you the impact of the COVID-19 Relief Statewide Small Business Assistance Program. Early this spring, 17 Pennsylvania-based CDFIs agreed to collaborate to help small businesses across Pennsylvania impacted by COVID-19. Through the support of the Senate Democratic Caucus, Governor Wolf, the Pennsylvania CDFI network received $225 million in June to make grants from $5,000 to $50,000. In order to create a fair and transparent process, the network focused on industries and businesses that were most severely impacted by the shutdown. Those businesses included restaurants, barbershops, salons, daycares, event spaces, and others. We had additional preferences for women, low-income communities, low-income owners, and commercial corridors. Finally, and most importantly, the state agreed to allocate half, or $100 million, for historically disadvantaged businesses, which include African American, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, and Pacific Islanders. The CDFIs have been around for 30 years. Philadelphia has the luxury of being the home to 11 CDFIs that range from large, the United Bank of Philadelphia and PIDC, to mid-size Finanta, the Enterprise Center, to small Entrepreneur Works, Neighborhood Promise Fund. Though it is not the first time we have worked together, it was the first time at this scale. Each CDFI provided resources including capital, staff, and other assets. PIDC led the communications effort for the group. The Reinvestment Fund provided support to make sure that our assumptions and our systems were fair. 3 of our smallest CDFI leaders are part of the 6-member executive committee, and all of the CDFIs opened their doors to small businesses to help with the submission of applications. The network assisted over 10,000 Philadelphia businesses apply for $198 million. In our first round, we approved 1,124 businesses for just over $20 million. In our second round, which will begin next week, We anticipate funding another 1,200 businesses for over $21 million. Last week, Mayor Jim Kenney awarded the network $20 million to focus on Philadelphia. This will allow the network to fund an additional 1,000 businesses. In order to expedite the distribution of funds to the small businesses, the network will utilize its existing application and will only fund businesses that did not receive a grant under the PA state program. We are grateful for the city's support in driving more dollars to small businesses severely impacted by COVID-19. Thank you.
And this is Dan Betancourt, president of the PA CD5 Network and also of Community First Fund. What I want to share with you is what we all know is that the federal stimulus dollars did not get to black and brown businesses. And so the PA CD5 Network approached the governor and the state legislature, particularly with help from Senator Hughes, because we knew that there was $4 billion in federal dollars sitting there not being used for black and brown businesses. And just prior to this, we know what happened with PPP dollars from the SBA. They did not get to black and brown business. So we were dismayed by what happened and came together as a coalition, as Jim described. So what we are grateful that Philadelphia City Council and the mayor awarded $20 million to the network to do another round in Philadelphia, another round of about $20 million. So as Jim said, the first was 20, the second was 20. Those were state dollars, and this third round is city CARES dollars. After those three rounds of about $60 million, we know that there's going to be about 160 million left. One of our concerns is that after those three rounds, there's going to be about 7,000 black and brown and Main Street businesses who will not be funded. And so even if we want to fund on a 2-to-1 basis, which is what a lot of counties did nearby, we would have to fund another 70 million, 3,500 businesses just to get to some level of par with the other counties. Some of the counties around Philadelphia have used up to a third of their dollars, a quarter to a third, specifically for businesses in their community. Berks County, for example, got a $40 million allocation, and they provided about $10 million to small business. York County got about 40. They provided 15 million. Lancaster County got 100 million. They provided 35 million to small business. And it goes on like that across the state. Jim and I are working with Allegheny County to ask them to also put CARES dollars into small business. So again, we're here today to thank you. We appreciate the partnership. It's gonna be significant amount of support. We're going to help this next level of business owners, about 1,000 of them. We thank you for accepting the program that we have put together. You know, we have, as we said, 160 million sitting there, and they're all ranked, and we're just going to fund the next tranche. You know, we also invite you, if there's philanthropy out there, Dollars Beyond Care that you're aware of, please work with us. You know, we know that there may be other dollars, but in the end, we ultimately just want to thank you. We want to thank Councilman Green and the other council members on here and the mayor for the 20 million. And we encourage you to consider other CARES money and other sources to try to fund that 160 million and 7,000 black and brown businesses across Philadelphia. We thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim and Dan. And I know you have another appointment at 10:15. So I'm going to ask my colleagues to be somewhat brief, and I will try to do the same. But I just want to give a little perspective on the work that both of you have been doing from the very beginning. At the beginning of COVID-19, you know, this body was very creative in doing that $85 million transfer ordinance. And that was very supportive. And out of that $85 million, we're able to provide as a city about $7 million in general fund dollars to the city's PHL COVID grant and loan fund. And, you know, this was one of the first initiatives like this in the country. This actually predated the payroll protection program. And I know both of you were involved in that initiative, talking with both our Commerce Director, Sylvia Gay Howard, as well as Ann Beauvais Nevins from PIDC. And then you had the state program, And then that led to the initiative that you just talked about. And I think through your continued advocacy through each step of those programs, that's allowed us to get to this point. My question to both of you, and you also made advocacy to Congressman Dwight Evans, because initially, even with the payroll protection program, CDFIs like West Philadelphia Financial Services Institution and FNATA were not really part of that initiative, and you provided advocacy on that regard at the federal level. But as you all know, in that initial program that the city stood up, we had about 7,200 applications for assistance that reflected about $146 million. And although the city put in 7, and some of the people I talked about earlier were able to raise another number of dollars, I think we eventually got up to close to $14 million. That's a significant difference of $14 million and $146 million in requests. So can you give some perspective on type of businesses that will benefit from this new tranche of $20 million that will help augment the state program? And how can we best, as members of council, get information out to small business owners, especially on our neighborhood commercial corridors that desperately need assistance?
Sure. I can start with the majority of the applications that came in were from restaurants and personal care businesses. So that's your barbershop, your salon owners, your naileries, and they represented almost 50% of our applications. So those are your corridor-based businesses. And so those are the ones that probably are going to get the majority of these dollars. That being said, there are all other industries, event planners, daycares, and other types of industries that will benefit from the grant dollars that you have awarded us. I also want to point out that some of the challenges of all of these businesses, and in particular the applicants that were smaller in that $50,000 revenue range, is technology. Most of the problems that we had with applications was people not being able to submit the documents that were necessary. And that was primarily because they didn't either have a tablet or a computer or a scanning machine or a copier. And if they did have a scanning machine or a copier, they weren't able to scan more than one piece of paper at a time. And if you're trying to copy your tax returns and you've got 12 or 13 pages, you just can't do it. And unfortunately, it created additional time. Now, the benefit to that is we had multiple rounds. And because we had multiple rounds, this wasn't a first come, first served process. Most of those people were able to get their applications in the second round. But I think as we look forward in terms of partnering, we really need to look at how do we help these small businesses improve their technology use to get them closer to this 21st century business types.
And so to follow up on that, and if any council colleagues have questions, please indicate in the chat feature. I see Councilmember Jones. And so I'll ask a question before we come into Councilmember Jones. I see also Councilmember Gautier and Councilmember Maria Kiana Sanchez. And so you're working with various counties around the Commonwealth. You mentioned Allegheny County, Berks County. I know Montgomery County recently allocated $10 million for small businesses in their county using their federal CARES dollars. So the administration put in $20 million to augment this program. So I think you said a number. I just want to make sure you state for the record, what's the amount that Philadelphia should put in to be comparable with other counties in the Commonwealth in reference to the amount of CARES dollars they put in to help small businesses?
What I've seen, it's a range of 1-to-1 and 2-to-1. What I mean by that is that, for example, in your county, we just closed around about 16, 17 million dollars in small business applied, and they allocated about 12. So that's almost a 1-to-1. In Berks County, it's a similar story. We had about it was about 7 or 8 million, and they allocated 6 million. And so what we thought a good rule of thumb is to try to fund at least a 2-to-1. And so since we're going to have, after those 2 rounds, we're going to have 160 million left, a good rule of thumb would maybe to try to do 70 to 80 million dollars. Of course, you've already allocated 20 of that 70 to 80, so it's something to consider.
Thank you. Dan, we'll now go to Councilmember Gautier.
Thank you both for your testimony.
Councilmember Gautier, I'm sorry. Councilmember Jones did raise his hand first.
Okay.
So I like to acknowledge my elders. So Councilmember Jones, then Councilmember Gautier, and then Kiana Sanchez in that order.
So much for civility. See that debate last night.
I'm being civil. I'm acknowledging my elders.
All right, listen. First and foremost, I want to thank you and your team. I'm going to take a step back to the night of the unfortunate sacking of the mall at 52nd and Jefferson, which you are an integral part of. But I remember talking to you that night and how steadfast you were about holding your ground, standing your ground, and fighting for those businesses there. That was echoed aftermath with all of the relief that you were able to give those individual businesses, and now reporting on the relief efforts for financial assistance to businesses that often don't come with the big 8 accounting firms providing them technical assistance. So for you to package those kinds of loans for businesses that have to balance walking and chewing gum, building airplanes while they fly it, kudos to you. And thank you for making sure that those dollars went to the appropriate parties. I also want to say that in this regard, but for you, many of my members represent commercial corridors that have not reopened, businesses that are still closed. And many reasons are cited, and some of the technical assistance that you provide, can that be expanded? One of the things that we found out was a lot of small businesses were underinsured, that they had the bare minimum amount of insurance in order to say that they had insurance to meet loan covenants, to be able to deal with slip and falls, but nothing that dealt with business interruption and for things like pandemics and looting. So is there a component of what you're doing that can be enhanced to provide more of that technical assistance so that more businesses are eligible? I sit on the executive committee of PIDC, so I applaud our approvals, but I also find that we need to learn more from our denials and figure out how we can get more people eligible.
Yes, Councilman, and thank you for your recognition. Appreciate it. There's definitely things that you can do. I think the technical assistance is really important. I think one of the things that you mentioned as it relates to the insurance, we have business owners who have identified an asset, essentially. Those businesses that they have and those assets that they now have, they want to grow those assets. So they really spend a lot of time figuring out how they can grow the asset, first identifying it and then growing it. I think we need to also spend time on how we protect those assets. And we just haven't done a whole lot of that in the past. So that would include insurance. That would include making sure that we have the right relationships. And so there's a lot of other things that we can do, but the technical assistance and teaching that is what's really going to be important. And quite frankly, what it comes down to is dollars. There are a lot of very good technical assistance providers in the city of Philadelphia. A lot of us do it for free. I know our organization does a lot of it for free, but we could do more if we had some additional resources.
And I want to recognize my colleagues, Mr. Chairman, who on the day of and the day after some of that looting were out there on the front line. Kathy Gilmore Richardson wanted to go out, me and her, by ourselves. And that wasn't going to happen. You mentioned that I was respecting your elders. She did not respect her elders, wanted me to go with her along with a member Gaudier. They're fireballs that, listen, I'm not, we experienced a lot, the 72 hours worth of uncertainty, but I have to tip my hat to my colleagues who were fearless in joining you out there on the front line. And so we're in this together. I'm glad the chairman has had this hearing, and let us know what we can do to help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones. And I recall that Councilmember Gaudier and Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson, who was wearing blue, and she was joined by her members of Zeta Phi Beta and Phi Beta Sigma. So I will go mob them for their advocacy that day. Next, we have Councilman Gaudier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank you both for your testimony and for the work that you're doing. I was so excited to know that we were embarking on this program and that we would have trusted partners like CDFIs who really have the credibility and the knowledge to reach deep into our neighborhoods to get our small businesses the resources that they deserve during this time. So thank you so much. One thing that troubled me when I first heard about this program were some of the requirements around or the restrictions around serving business owners who have certain criminal backgrounds. There are many people for whom entrepreneurship is one of the only paths that they can take. Given their backgrounds. And so it felt to me that we might be blocking a lot of folks out in our who are business owners in our neighborhoods who have been through the criminal justice system. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about how that's going. Is it your sense that that's an impediment to us serving business owners, particularly on our neighborhood commercial corridors? And how has and can you also remind us of some of those restrictions?
Sure. We started out utilizing the SBA policy for criminal background checks. And one of the benefits of being in a great community with a huge network and a good relationship with the Commerce Department and others is that we were contacted by the Commerce Department and representatives from, I can't remember the legal entity that they have, but they actually sued the SBA to reduce the criminal, the time frame and the felonies that would be ineligible to participate. So when we first started in the grant program, and this is literally happening within a week or two of the start of the program, is we started with 5 years. If you had a felony, a financial felony for 5 years, you would not be able to participate. And if we had additional, if you had other crimes, it was, I believe, 3 years. But after going through these conversations with this legal group, and there's a public legal group or a nonprofit legal group that handles this stuff, and I just can't remember the name of them at the moment. But they helped us come up with a policy that reflected the new SBA policy, and that reduced it to 1 year of financial crimes. And so if you were on parole, you were still eligible for the program. If you were on probation, you were still eligible for the program. So we don't have the numbers as of right now because even though it was a question of have you ever had that, we just haven't pulled that data yet. So I couldn't tell you how many actually applied. We can probably go back and get that information later.
Thank you. I'm glad to know that there were changes in that area that lessened some of those restrictions. And I do think it's something that we should keep an eye on as we move forward, just given the reality of what's going on in our neighborhoods.
Agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Gaudier. Now we'll have Councilmember Maria Aquino Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I won't prolong it. I want to respect and honor the clock and the time that our partners have given us. I just want to echo some of the comments and some of the sentiments. I've always been a fan of us figuring out how to better collaborate, coordinate, with our CDFIs, and I want to thank Sylvie Gaillard at the Commerce Department. When we did our first initiative, I was a strong advocate that we figure out a way of doing this. I want us to begin to look at lessons learned about who qualified, who didn't, and really help inform what a technical assistance program would look like, particularly for our commercial carders. Just last night, I was having a conversation with an independent contractor. He's a barber. We talked a little bit around the need for them to understand the filings of their 1099s, independent contractors, all of the things that some of his partners and people in the business, he said to me, he knew a dozen barbers who left and are like working for FedEx or Amazon. They just didn't know how to navigate, and because, we made them just close up shop. So really want to figure out how this crisis creates an opportunity for us to better prepare technical assistance for our commercial carder workers, how they can provide technical assistance, and really do a campaign with our community accountants. This is my biggest struggle in the community. I'm facing this now with the bodegas and others. This need to hide revenue and really not project out their income, cause them not to be able to show where they had losses if they legitimately have losses, even though many of them did not close up during this period. So, as part of this, and I thank you, Mr. Chair, for doing this. As part of this, let us not come out, let us not waste this opportunity to come out with some really clear cut. These are the people we weren't able to help. This is the reason why. How do we realign our programming to really hone in on those gaps, right? And then use our partners in the chambers, the ethnic chambers and others to meet that need. And I'm going to be really looking for that for next year as the Commerce Department, as we pivot and some of the commercial carder work pivots. I want it to be really aligned with the experience. You all have a list. People applied, they didn't get funded. We know who they are. We know where they are. And even though we weren't able to help them now, it doesn't mean we can't go back to them and provide that kind of technical assistance for the future. So I want to honor the clock to the gentleman. I really want to thank you. I think the work and, your fresh eyes on this and the fact that you knew the people on the ground really added to its success, and it's greatly appreciated. And I hope in the future, we value what you bring through your micro-lending, through all your things in the rebuilding of Philadelphia and rebuilding a more equitable Philadelphia. So thank you, gentlemen. I look forward to that work. Look forward to you guys really giving a paper that really outlines this, right? So that we can work with our Chamber of Commerce to meet those needs. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez. Councilmember Jones, if you could put yourself on mute. I know Councilmember Gilmore Richardson has a quick point of clarification.
Okay, so I'm always
Thank you,
looking
Mr.
out.
Chair. Mr. Burnett and Mr. Bentecourt, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for the work that you've been doing. It's been a pleasure to work with you on the ground and for you helping the small businesses that we have connected you with through the programs we've had via Zoom, the many Zoom meetings we've had. So thank you. I just wanted to ask a quick point of clarification. If Philadelphia County were to be on par with the resource allocation happening in other counties across the Commonwealth, we should be allocating an additional 50 to 60 million. Is that correct? I just wanted to get that point on the record.
Yes, you already allocated 20. So to get to that 70 or 80, you are absolutely correct.
Okay. I just wanted that point of clarification to be on the record, and also echo the sentiments of my colleagues relative to providing that technical assistance to all of our businesses. I've heard from a number of hair salons in my community who talked about needing that technical assistance throughout this process, and we were able to help some of them, right? Particularly through the city process, but we want to ensure that we can help as many people as possible. So thank you very much for your work, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. I would thank my colleagues for their questions, and also thank you, both Mr. Burnett, Mr. Betancourt for the work you're doing and the continued advocacy that we need to provide. We know that we need another $60 million from the city of Philadelphia to be on par with other counties. And we know there's a vast need, even with that additional $60 million. And we're waiting to hear information from our finance director, Rob DeBow, about the available federal CARES dollars that have not been allocated, because that number keeps changing, and that number must be spent by the end of December of this year. But we know we have a lot of businesses, even if we were able to provide another $60 million, that still will not get the support they need. So thank you for all the work you've been doing on behalf of the businesses in the city of Philadelphia and throughout the Commonwealth. Thank you. With that, Mr. Iannuzzi, can you call the next panel?
Will Carter, Vice President of Local Government Affairs for the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce. Claire Morasso Greenwood, Executive Director of CEO Council for Growth.
Thank you, Mr. Iannuzzi. If both witnesses can state their name for the record and then proceed with their testimony.
All right, Councilman, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. William Carter, Vice President of Local Government Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and council members. Claire Greenwood, Executive Director of the Chamber's CEO Council for Growth.
So I will go ahead and start. Good morning, councilpersons Green, Squilla, and members of the joint committees on Commerce and Economic Development and Finance. I'm William Carter, Vice President of Local Government Affairs for the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia. I'm joined by my colleague, who you just heard, Claire Morasso Greenwood, who is Director of the Chamber's CEO Council for Growth and Lead Coordinator of the Philadelphia Regional Recharge and Recovery Task Force. As we're all aware, the global pandemic impacted the lives and livelihoods of individuals across the world, nation, and region. Thanks to the tremendous efforts of the city administration, city council, civil service workers, our healthcare systems, frontline workers, and the philanthropic community, our city has been able to maintain a reasonable chance to recover during this from this unprecedented crisis. City's councils continuing to work in this regard is invaluable, and hearings such as this not only help to inform our citizenry about recovery efforts, but also help to serve to ensure the cohesiveness in all efforts. And I know you guys are busy. I follow you on social media. You're not only on Zoom, but you're on Zoom. You're back and forth across the city, helping those residents and businesses and people in places in need. And I just wanted to let you know personally that is much appreciated. As you're also aware, the growth and productivity and valuability of our business and civic communities, particularly our small and minority-owned enterprises, have been greatly affected over the past several months. In an effort to reverse these effects, the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia and its Regional Council, CEO Council for Growth, along with the city and county governments, participants, and nonprofit cohorts, initiated a public-private collaboration with commitments from over 160 leaders to devise and present and implement solutions for this crisis in a unified voice as the Philadelphia Regional Recharge and Recovery Task Force. The task force members convened in June and July to discuss how to move inclusive recovery forward and to develop a vision for our region's recovery, with a goal to both mitigate our current economic emergency and strengthen the region for a prosperous, equitable future. All of this work was done through a lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout the process to ensure that the recommendations benefit all citizens and to help ensure outcomes consistent with the Chamber's equity pledge. Through its recommendations and with these collaborations, we believe we will be able to fund and build capacity to ensure success, defend our regional market share, and even attain greater market share from other regions across several sectors. It should be noted that this report is not a plan for reopening, but a shared effort to stabilize, energize, and prepare Greater Philadelphia for the future. Having worked in City Council for 16 years and with the insights I have now advocating on behalf of the business community, I'm certain that collaborations like this task force are necessary for Philadelphia's future economic success. And with that, I'm going to segue to Claire Morasso Greenwood for further insights.
Good morning again. As I introduce myself, Claire Greenwood. Maybe to add to Will's comments, what emerged from this stakeholder process of about 160 folks over a 5 to 6 week period was a clear vision for who we want to be as a community. That really, I think, sort of looked like a set of 5 aspirations with the potential to support our region's recovery, but also differentiate ourselves. I believe I heard Chairman Green earlier mention the idea that we wanted to think about both where we should be on the defense and to defend our core and to be focused on our community, but also where we could be on the offense and to potentially take opportunity that we may not recognize in a different environment. This set of aspirations sort of imagines a Philadelphia region that's a new model, national model for how to learn, apprentice, and work in the jobs of the future. A place known for investing in and growing small, local, and Black and brown businesses. A digital community with increased digital literacy, technology, and internet use. I did hear that in the previous panel's testimony, how critical that is for businesses in our community and certainly in the neighborhood corridors. The healthiest and most livable community in the Northeast, and clearly the public health crisis is front and center right now and is a critical element to, as Will said, getting to a point of the elements of a recovery strategy. And the last, and just as a point of focus, the group really felt like the opportunity, particularly to be on the offense, is as a global center for cell and gene therapy. But core to achieving these aspirations are a set of short-term actions and our ability to focus right now and really work collaboratively across government, private sector, industries to collectively work towards a handful of things and see progress towards our short-term goals. So we, I think Will mentioned, released about a week and a half ago that sort of first phase work, this first 6 items of focus in the short-term action. And they're really around 3 concepts. The first we view as sort of table stakes for future economic recovery in prioritizing regional health and safety through coordinated and equitable testing, contact tracing, the communication around the public health crisis, and certainly operating standards. The second area is really focused on creating opportunities for displaced workers and being intentional to commit to diversifying the workforce. And the last is really how we think about, in the short term, getting on a path to bolster support for Black, brown, and local businesses. So, Will, I think if you want to add anything about the important advocacy items that we're working on right now against those top 6 actions, and then I'm sure we can take questions from the committee.
Certainly. The conversations that we have been having since the announcement have really focused on our inclusive growth strategy, working with cohorts to upskill individuals in every possible new economy job across the spectrum, and for current jobs that haven't gone away. Obviously, we know that a lot of individuals don't go to 4-year colleges or don't go on to any type of graduate degree, but have skills and have the ability to work and maintain a family-sustaining wage. And we want to make sure that we're more intentional. And I need to say more intentional about doing that. Prior to my joining the chamber, the roadmap for growth was in effect, and most of you guys are familiar with that, which was about making sure that the narrative right now of a tale of 2 cities is evaporated, and we are more intentional about being in neighborhoods and supporting our entrepreneurs in those neighborhoods and along commercial corridors. And that is what the chamber is walking in terms of our equity pledge, and it's important that we are walking that talk. So we are providing more resources and being more intentional about helping to upskill individuals into the current jobs and for the current economy. And we're also putting more supports behind minority, small, Black and brown businesses, which it was mentioned earlier. Some of the problems that they had, a lot of businesses, not just Black and brown, but small businesses had in getting the relief that they needed for recovery from the federal and state government and local government was due to lack of infrastructure and technical services. And so we are being even more intentional about helping provide those supports in those areas to make sure that they're shored up. And so if there is a future emergency, that they're straight. But if there's not a future emergency, they're more foundational to growth. And so that's what we have been working on, and we'll continue to work on with council members, some of the council members on this call, and other stakeholders throughout the city. So with that, we'll take questions.
All right. Thank you both for your testimony. I wanted to touch base on some of the aspirations that you talked about. In particular, I know you at the Chamber and the Council for Growth have been working with McKinsey, which is a large international management consulting firm. And I think in the very beginning of this pandemic, they defined the pandemic from a 5-stage perspective. The first being resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, and reform. And when I think about that 5-stage perspective, it reminds me of someone on a day like today, we did not have COVID, who was walking down Broad Street at 12 o'clock and rushed into a meeting, and they missed something and they tripped and fell, and all their papers scattered all over Broad Street. And so for the next few moments, they're trying to figure out what just happened. And that kind of reminds me of what happened with COVID. It just came out of nowhere. And then we just had to figure out what is going on. And that's kind of the resolve phase. The next phase is kind of resilience, where you're now realize, okay, I tripped and fell. I'm on Broad Street. I'm okay. And there's no cars coming around. Let me try to find my papers and let me get that stuff together. I may have scuffed my shoes or my knee or my heels, but let me kind of get myself together from what just happened, which is how we started moving out of COVID and trying to figure out how we deal with this. And then the next phase is return. I'm trying to get back to where we were, or where I was before I tripped and fell and got my heels caught in the sidewalk, or I tripped and messed up my Oxfords. That's the return, and how we as a nation are trying to get back to where we were prior to COVID. And I think the private sector and the public sector will spend a lot of time on that resolve, resilience, and return. But I want to take a little moment to talk about the last two, which is reimagination and reform. And we're able to use and have conversations like this because of technology, and use platforms like Microsoft Teams or Zoom or WebEx. And in your Recharge and Recovery Task Force, you have these aspirations. And one aspiration you're talking about becoming a national model as a place, Philadelphia being a place for small Black and brown and locally owned businesses to grow and thrive. And that goes back to what Ms. Greenwood talked about, being on the offense, and what I talked about in my initial conversation. So can you give a little detail on that aspiration? How are we going to have chamber members help to grow small Black and brown and locally owned businesses, and allow the city of Philadelphia to become a national model for this type of investment that can really put Philadelphia on the offense? And then also your other point and aspiration in reference to workforce. We know we have a 26% poverty rate. We have a number of people that need jobs, and we have a number of jobs that are available, but they don't have the resources to get the skills to access those jobs. So when you talk about being a national model in reference to workforce, how are you going to do those things? And give us some perspective. What are your action steps on the workforce perspective, as well as the making Philadelphia a place that's going to be known for growing and investing in small Black, brown, and locally owned businesses?
Certainly. I'll jump in first, and then I'll let Claire follow. First of all, there are a number of ways that this can be achieved, but the primary way we've been talking about in terms of short-term goals is to go through the procurement process with many of our large institutions and be more intentional once again about selecting Black and brown businesses for those opportunities. Once again, when I worked in City Council, I actually co-wrote the legislation that requires economic opportunity plans on all city projects back in 2007 with a guy from the law department named Howard Rye, who's no longer with us. And I remember thinking at that time, oh, this is going to help so much. This is going to make Black businesses move the needle in terms of how much business they're getting from the city. And dishearteningly, it didn't happen that way. There were goals to be met, but I don't think there was the intention behind it from a lot of companies to actually follow through with those goals. And you guys know in City Council, we've said at several hearings trying to fill out paperwork, watching the applicants fill out paperwork on their EOPs right there during the council session. And it was an afterthought. And so what we need to do is change that afterthought into a forethought. And that's has to not just happen on the public level. The law, although a lot of Black and brown businesses go for city business, the larger pool of resources and revenue and possibility opportunities is in the private sector. And so you will see, and you see in the report, one of the primary 6 goals is to increase Black and brown procurement in the private sector. That means we're going to be more intentional in terms of making sure those businesses get those opportunities. And I'm going to tell you, I'm on conversations just about every day on this exact subject. A good 80% of my calls have to do with inclusion. That lets me know, and it even further encourages me after joining the chamber back in October, that the people at the chamber are intentional about doing this and serious about doing it. You got to understand, I'm a guy who worked in public service with you guys for several years, and I had a different perception of the chamber than I have now. And I know that they're just like they're in City Council. There are a lot of good people who want to do great things over in the private sector also. It's just that, in my opinion, it could be better collaboration, and I mentioned that in my previous notes. Secondly, in terms of workforce, you're right. We have to upskill individuals for those positions. There were a lot of companies previously who required you to have a bachelor's degree, required you to have an associate's degree, some type of degree before they would even consider you. And I'm hearing a lot more conversation around, okay, we don't need those particular degrees. We need you to have the skills to be able to do the job well. And it's more about training people for the soft skills in office work. And so I can tell you this, I remember telling my age, but when Windows came around, it took me a second to really figure out how to work that. And there are a lot of people who still don't know how to work Windows. And we need to be able to put them in a position to learn those skills, how to use. I still can't use the copier where I work, and that's embarrassing. But I'm an attorney, and I should know that. And I have to get people to help me work the copier because the copiers are new now. But these are the soft skills that you learn being on the job, communicating with people, understanding what it takes to be an integral part of a team. And the chamber is definitely, and its membership is going to be more intentional about providing those opportunities. Claire, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, so maybe I'll just follow Will's comments with a couple of specifics. In particular, I'll start on the workforce and upskilling. I think, Chairman Green, that you asked about. So the sort of focus there is around a handful of things. First, how do we help kind of as a community, but certainly with the resources of the business community, support and provide access to training? So you talking about sort of upskilling and providing resources for individuals. We have at least one member, and I believe there are others who are coming to the table there who are going to provide access to their learning management platform as a service through Philadelphia Works to collaborate on really bringing scale to access to training. We are beginning to look at how to encourage, as Will just described, what's referred to as skills-based hiring and other HR policies that are really focused on reducing barriers to employment. And hopefully folks are aware, but if not, skills-based hiring is really on emphasizing a candidate's skills and prior experience and practical experience rather than a degree as a proxy for that experience. So it is one example, but certainly a key example of one way of doing that. So how do we both share best practices around those areas of work within our membership, but also to extend that conversation beyond. We are right now really focusing on understanding where upskilling and reskilling can be most relevant for high demand jobs. So we were trying to be very focused about where those roles are and making the connection points as effectively as possible. So a few short-term opportunities we think are in warehousing and logistics, information technology, and energy and infrastructure. But we know, importantly, in healthcare, financial services, and others. But how to be really focused and leverage commitments from organizations to participate in that process. On your additional question regarding a vision of being a community that supports companies and organizations that are local, and to Will's point, in particular on the procurement and supplier diversity piece, our intent is to gather interest and commitments from organizations in the region and then work with them to understand sort of where they are in that process. Do you look at your spending and your vendor database? You should. How do we help you do that? To share those best practices and help organizations learn. Some we know are farther on that road than others. And as Will said, we are already working with many members who are looking to understand where they can find diverse businesses, whether that is through the city's OEO database or other resources. Our colleagues, as you heard from Jim earlier, are really, I think, leading the charge and focus around how to provide capital. And I think we'll hear more from Ann later, Ann Nevins from PIDC, about sort of the constraint around that capital resource for Black and brown businesses in the community. And then related, we are also trying to help support a couple members of the community who are looking at the development of a Black venture fund specifically targeted to technology entrepreneurs. So those are just a handful of maybe more specific examples, but happy to take additional questions there. Certainly, as Will mentioned, in our own programming at the Chamber, for more than 10 years, we have had our CEO Access Network, which we are continuing and growing those partnerships this year, as well as our Roadmap for Growth, which this year will be doing a series of I'll call them events, but sort of workshops in communities. And I hope that we can partner with others that you're hearing from today on that kind of content and technical assistance that would be most useful for us to bring to those conversations. And of course, we continue our advocacy for the resources from the federal government to flow to state and local in order to support additional capacity for Jim and Dan and Ann and others to provide more of the necessary capital to organizations in neighborhoods and in our communities.
Thank you. I just have one question, and I know we have one final question, and then we'll have questions from Council Members Catherine Gilmore Richardson, Councilmember Dom, and Councilmember Gauthier. In reference to the things you talked about, especially regarding procurement and diversifying, as well as workforce and helping to have more people from the city of Philadelphia, especially African American and Latin constituents, How will the chamber hold businesses accountable to meeting those goals and standards?
So I'll once again go first on that. That is a mechanism that we are currently working on at this time. We want to make sure that we're moving the needle, no matter, as Claire mentioned, you have people who are further along in this area and people who, quite frankly, haven't done that well in that area. So we have in the equity pledge, we had several members of the chamber sign that pledge. We also are encouraging other individuals to sign it. And when they sign this pledge, we're not talking about a pledge. Everybody hears about a pledge all the time. We're talking about walking that talk, and we're being, once again, I can't use the word enough, more intentional about walking that talk because several of our business community members have been walking that talk for some time. So we're developing a mechanism to be able to track that. We want to make sure that people are encouraged to walk in those steps. We don't want, it's not about, hey, we're about to point you out for not being that diverse. No, we want to help you get to be diverse as you can be. So part of that is, and I say this all the time, my 3 Bs is first setting a baseline. Secondly, employing best practices, whatever they may be. And then 3, committing to bettering those numbers year after year. And I think with that, framework, we will be able to get where we want to be in this area. So I'll pass it once again to Claire.
Yeah, thank you, Will. I think you probably covered it there. But the importance here, Chairman Green, will be to figure out how we set the effective baseline so that we can measure progress against a baseline. As I'm sure you're all aware, particularly at a 5-county level, there's no good data set for measuring progress here. So I think our first task here is to design what a dashboard could look like and do so in collaboration with not only those who need to procure services, but certainly with the key voice of diverse business owners at the table. Because it may not just be a spend shift that matters. It may be a long-term contract, as an example, versus a single engagement with an organization that is really critical to moving the needle and adding jobs for that organization over time. So we want to be really intentional about that process. And as Will said, are working on developing those measures as we speak.
And I would say in that regard, we're working with the city OEO. We're working with the African American Chamber of Commerce. We're also working with the Economy League and several other people who have been doing good work in this space already to get a model that we believe will work for and be the most effective for the city of Philadelphia.
Thank you. We'll now go to Councilmember Catherine Gilmore Richardson.
Mommy,
Okay,
look.
thank you so much.
Mommy, look. When I press this button,
Great.
they come up.
Pardon me, virtual school. So thank
Sounds
you
like
so
my
much.
house.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your testimony. I just wanted to circle back to the workforce development piece, and you took a special amount of time to speak to upskilling and soft skill development. But I wanted to know if, as a part of your task force, if you've done any research or work with the workforce development organizations like Philadelphia Works and others to look at our labor market forecast post or through COVID-19 in the city. And you mentioned warehousing, or I guess multimodal logistics types companies, info and technology, energy infrastructure, healthcare, and finance. Could you just talk about the labor market forecast piece and what you all are seeing, who you have worked with? And then also I wanted to pay special and close attention to the energy infrastructure, particularly around the green economy and how we can focus on the green economy through our recovery efforts here in the city of Philadelphia. So thank you so much. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I'll
Claire,
jump in just on the, quickly. Thank you for the question. We are doing this work in collaboration with Philadelphia Works. So I think that was sort of the initial premise of your question, we are leveraging both the partnership, I think the desire to work in collaboration across their this sort of public and private effort. And I know that they are also working very closely with Commerce and PIDC on these efforts as well. So that's sort of, I think, the first response. In doing so, we're really leveraging their data set on the labor market indicators. But what we hope to bring to that is a check on that data set in the context of the reality of markets for individual employers. So the plan is to say, if we think it's warehousing and logistics, let's get a group of 15 of those employers together and really check to make sure that even though there may be a huge number of listings, are you hiring? What's the timing of your hiring? And what are the skills necessary to meet the threshold for those roles? There are examples where the labor market data would suggest there's large hiring needs in particular sectors or at particular employers. They may be posting jobs, but they may not be hiring for those roles right now. So we really view part of this exercise in the very, very short term is to ensure that we have as real-time information as possible about what those demands and needs are, so that the system, with Philadelphia Works, and they're also, which we appreciate very much, bringing the other county WIDs into the conversation, so that we're really working in collaboration with the public workforce system on this effort.
Mr. Chair, quickly, thank you so much for that response. And I just wanted to follow up and say that I think it's important that we also continue to work with the school district on curriculum realignment for the career and technical education programs that we have in the city of Philadelphia as well. So I just wanted to put that on the record. I do have a resolution on that issue that's pending. We will be having hearings, but we need to work with the district around curriculum realignment for the labor market indicators we're seeing in the city of Philadelphia, so that we can adequately prepare young people for those job opportunities that will be coming on board as they graduate. Because as you stated earlier in your testimony, Mr. Carter, that not all of our young people will go to college, but they should be career ready upon graduation. And that is the role we are tasked with in the city of Philadelphia. So thank you very, very much. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Councilmember Dom, followed by Councilmember Gautier and Councilmember Maria Aquino-Sanchez.
Thank you, Chairman Green and Co-Chair Squilla for this hearing today. I think that's great. And thank you, Chamber, for your testimony. I have two questions. One is just informational for my benefit. I'm assuming that the Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce also meets with, on a regular basis, all the other chambers of commerce in this city, like the African American Chamber, the Hispanic Chamber, the Asian Chamber, and I'm assuming that we are all working collaboratively together to help all businesses in the city. Is that on a monthly basis? Tell me how that exactly works. How does those meetings occur?
Yes, we actually have a monthly meeting with the chambers as a cohort all together. But I'm on conversations and in conversations with the leaders of all those chambers on a regular basis. In between that time, we were just on a call yesterday about we had an event, I believe it was yesterday, regarding investing in Black and brown businesses. And we had Jennifer Rodriguez from the Hispanic American Chamber of Commerce was one of the panelists. I talked with Steve Bradley from the African American Chamber of Commerce on a regular basis, Zach Wilco from the Independence Chamber, and Nick Shinoy. I actually have a call with him today from the Asian American Chamber of Commerce. So yes, we do talk on a regular basis.
That's great. And do you have, pre-COVID, I guess, but maybe post-COVID we could do it. Are there actually functions and events where all members of all the chambers are invited, where there can be a mixing of everybody together so that everyone can have an ability to meet each other and collectively and collaboratively help each other?
Yes. We I didn't realize how many events the chamber did prior to coming over there. Over here now, the transition is done. But so yeah, there are about 300 different events that the Chamber does, a little over 300 events, and many of them have to do with collaborating with the other chambers. And we've been trying to maintain that as much as possible during COVID through the Zoom platforms and Microsoft Teams and things like that.
Okay, thank you. And here's my second question, probably maybe a little more in depth, and that is, if you were going to recommend to this council body 3 legislative priorities that we can actually accomplish, okay, for city council to help smartly restart our economy and to help the existing businesses that we've talked about recover and help us grow new businesses, what would those 3 priorities be for us? And let me give you some background on where I'm going with this so you understand where my head's at. There was a study done that showed that of the top 35 cities in the U.S. for employment change in the last 10 years, 09 to 19, Philadelphia ranked 28th out of 35, almost towards the bottom of the top 35 cities in the country, which concerns me. The second chart I just want to call to your attention has to do with the development of Black-owned businesses per 1,000 residents compared to, I guess, Philadelphia. You've probably seen the study, compared to Atlanta, New York, Boston, and Washington. And it showed for Philadelphia 1.8. It showed for Boston 2.5, Washington 5.0 per thousand, New York 3.4, and Atlanta 4.7. And it also showed, though, for total businesses, kind of shocking for me, maybe not, that Philadelphia per 1,000 residents for all businesses was only 12.1 and was the lowest compared to Atlanta at 24.6, doubled Philadelphia's production of new businesses existing. And then it showed by the region, which also concerns me, that of those 5 cities I mentioned, of which Philadelphia is one of them, New York, Boston, Atlanta, and Washington, Philadelphia is the only city where the jobs are greater in the suburbs than in the city. We're the only region where jobs are greater in the suburbs than the city. Every other city has more jobs than their suburbs. So in that backdrop, could you give this council body 3 ideas how we can change that dynamic, how we can, and restart our economy in a smart way? And this is a great opportunity for us because this crisis gives us an opportunity to change what we've been doing in the past and hopefully get on a different path than what these numbers are indicating.
Certainly. Well, first, I would like to bring everyone's attention back to the recommendations in the report that we have. We have 6 short-term recommendations. The first is, number one, we have to make sure that we have a safe city and brand our city as the safest city in America, no matter how we do that. That takes coordinated efforts in terms from the city, the local nonprofit sector, and the local private sector, in terms of branding our city and making sure that we can back that up. And so that takes contact tracing, working with the city. We've talked with Dr. Farley on a number of occasions, and we had what we call a City Hall Connectors program with him last month, where he talked about the city's process for contact tracing, how they're trying to build that up. But we want to be known as the best city for that. We want to be known as the city that has the best coordinated efforts in ensuring our city is safe. I tell people this all the time. My mother won't come out of the house, and let alone go to a restaurant to do anything like that. And so until she feels safe, and a number of people are just like her, we're not going to get that robust boost to our economy back. So we have to do that. Secondly, as we talked about, upskilling Black and Brown, upskilling people, period, but making sure that Black and Brown workers are in the workforce to the degree that they should be, and represented in businesses as they should be. So we have to invest in that. We have to invest in the ability to skills training programs. We have to offer those. We have to work with the city in that regard. We mentioned Philadelphia Works, and there are a number of cohorts in the nonprofit sector that do this. We want to help scale those. We're actually working with the council president on an initiative that he's announcing tomorrow in North Philadelphia, where we're going to be upskilling returning citizens to work in landscaping and things like that. So they have a experience to be able to come out of a program and work for some of the landscaping companies that are a part of the chamber. And those chamber members have committed to hiring these individuals. And so we want to do that in all spectrums of the job market. And then in the business market, once again, it's really about investing in businesses. And so not only are we talking about more intentionality about providing opportunities for procurement, but we're also talking about making sure that financial institutions are being more intentional about lending to these ambitious and capable entrepreneurs out here in our city. And so I say this all the time. It takes two things to succeed. It takes a genuine opportunity and the ability to take advantage of that genuine opportunity. And so I will tell you this, the Chamber is in the business of providing and offering genuine opportunities and working with whomever to make sure that individuals are prepared to take advantage of those opportunities. So any type of legislation you have in that regard that would be help move these things forward. Obviously, allocations and investments for skills, training, and things like that would be great. Would be very welcomed. And I know this is something that you particularly have talked about, Councilman Dom. We have to talk about training in high school, financial literacy training in high school. I've been to Cristo Rey School. Matter of fact, you participated in an event with us at Cristo Rey, and I was just blown away. And I come from a long line of teachers, grandmother, great-grandmother, mother, all teachers. And just the format that school works in, where they're training entrepreneur skills, and they're training for other skills, and they also have financial literacy training, is key. A lot of people come out of college. I came out of college, and I didn't have great credit because I messed it up in college. I had to rebuild my credit, and I didn't have a sense of that. But if you're not teaching these skills, if you start teaching these skills, I say as a freshman in high school, you come out, you have a relationship with a bank because you've been keeping a passbook. Apparently, they used to do that. Councilman Sanchez said they did that a long time ago. We need to be able to have individuals come out, if they're not going to go into college, be ready to start a business if they have the ability, because they have a good financial literacy skills. So anything that you can do in that regard with the school district, and I know you've been pushing on that, I'm sure will be welcome.
Thank you. Well, I guess in that light, I'm just going to reiterate what everybody knows I'm going to say, and that is we should be mandatorily teaching pre-K to 12th grade financial literacy, coding, tech, and entrepreneurship. Mandatory in every grade. But having said that, I guess, Will, what I'm saying really is that we have a structural problem. These information that I stated are from the last 10 years, even before the pandemic. We are, as a city, this is an opportunity for us to really restructure, I think, our tax system so that we're not at the bottom of these charts. We're at the top. And I guess what I'm looking for from the Chamber, you don't have to give it to me today. You can go back to the Chamber and kind of come back to this body and through our chairperson and give us the recommendations. What should we be doing as a council to change these statistics for the city overall? Because I believe that we have to grow the whole pie. It's not just one section of the pie. Everyone benefits when we grow the whole pie. And so Black and brown communities, our numbers are atrocious. And we need to figure out why is that happening. But it's also bad for all businesses. This is not just one sector. This is the whole Philadelphia. This is a chance for us to change what we've been doing. And that's what I'm looking for from the Chamber, to come back with those 3 concrete recommendations. Anyway, thank you for your testimony today. Thank you.
Absolutely. I will take that back and get back with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Dom. Now we'll have Councilmember Gautier, Sanchez, Brooks, and then Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Will and Claire. Thank you for sharing the outcome of your report and your recommendations. My question is similar to Councilmember Dom's, but I was wondering if you could talk specifically about how many and the ways in which you've engaged Black and brown businesses in the task force and in the work of developing the recommendations to ensure that the recommendations in this area are meaningful and relevant to them. And in particular, I'm thinking about some of the more vulnerable small businesses, like those on our corridors. If you could speak to that.
Right. Claire, you want to talk about the formation of the committee and the diversity?
Yeah, thank you. And I was actually just trying to pull the exact numbers up so that I could give you a very clear answer to the question. To your question, the 165 folks or so who were kind of foundational over June and July, and I will get you that specific number, were intentionally a diverse group of individuals. I'll give you the specific statistics when I can, because I can't talk and look it up at the same time. And to my comment previously, as we go forward on the specific recommendation around short-term strategy to encourage more sort of buying local, Black and brown, our intent is to even further deepen the engagement with organizations and individuals who are running businesses so that their voice can really help define not only the measures by which we want to measure progress, but the action plan itself. So let me dig through my notes here so I can give you that number specifically, but I take your point, and it is a very good one, that as we go forward with this strategy, it's really critical that the voice of Black and brown businesses are at the table. Again, the design, how we measure progress, and what the specific action items are.
And while Claire pulls that up, I will say that the diversity numbers were high in this regard, and purposely. Prior to us coming in and testifying, I believe Jim Burnett was on, and he was part of the task force. And he works with West Philadelphia Financial Services, and several of the local CDFIs and organizations like Enterprise Center. We work with them on a regular basis also. So I would say to further enhance this, you can always improve. We want to be able to work with each council member. And if you are recommending any organizations or cohorts in your district to work with us, we definitely welcome that and look forward to working with them.
Sure. You named a number of organizations who I would think would be at the table and who are experiencing this work. I just think it's also important to hear directly from small business owners around recommendations that we're going to put forward. If we're talking about barriers to procurement, for instance, we have to understand that from the perspective of a small business owner. If we're talking about capital and barriers to that, we have to understand that directly from the experience of a small business owner and the type of small business owners that would be in our neighborhoods. And I think so I look forward to seeing more on that information, particularly if our council is going to sort of embrace these recommendations. We have to make sure that they're vetted by the folks we want to serve.
And let me just add to what I said earlier. You're absolutely right. The task force was broken down into 8 verticals or subcommittees, and one of them was on small businesses. And there were a number of local businesses as part of that particular meeting and that particular task force subcommittee. And I was on a few of those calls, and let me say, they were very aggressive calls, and I believe they should have been. People are talking about the historic disenfranchisement that they have experienced. And what I thought was best about that call was the candidness of the call, the diversity of the members of that task force subcommittee, and the number of topics that they broached that you and I may talk about when we're somewhere, or that I'm used to talking about in groups. But there's a diverse group of members of that task force subcommittee that were able to hear the concerns, the frustrations, and come back with recommendations in that regard. So we want to continue to expand that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez and Councilmember Brooks and Gilmore Richardson.
Thank you all very much, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for continuing to convene these conversations around our progress. I think this is not only timely, but necessary so folks get on the same page around this work. So, Will Carter, I was very happy to hear you say equity pledge. That's music to my ears, because ultimately, outside of setting up a baseline, goals are important, and any matrix should have some goals. Just kind of want to amplify some of the comments by my colleagues, Catherine from the CTE perspective, and how do we build the workforce, and Councilperson Gautier around connecting that. And I know Beth McConnell from PACDC is going to be testifying. We really need to get the chamber very much engaged in these commercial corridors and some of the work that is being done there. And the PACDC, because of the work they've done on the ground, I think provides a unique opportunity for the chamber as it really outlines its goals. You know, when I was doing B Corp legislation, one of the things that I learned when I went throughout the city and visited some of the B Corps is that you don't know what you don't know or what you don't want to see until you create some sort of framework to evaluate yourselves. And so I would encourage you that baseline really needs to speak to, you know, you don't want to embarrass your members, but you do need to establish a profile of your membership. You do need to give us the data about if your members are serious about setting up aspirational goals for this, they need to show us their profile, right? And, you know, we need to be able to call out a president and CEO of Wells Fargo when he says you don't have a resume file. Like, we need to say, that is unacceptable in 2020. And so while I don't want you to beat up your members, I do want you to have your members really reflect around what this means. And you can't do that if you don't have that baseline data, right? And I think, again, the neighborhood growth strategy, if you've learned anything through that process, and those of us who've participated with you in that process, is that there are a lot of strategic stakeholders on the ground that really want to be engaged, but there has to be a value system set up for that, right? Because I think people, you know, how many meetings do you go to? How many times do you sit at the table as the only person? You know, and you're preaching to yourself, right? Because you sit through these discussions. And if we're going to move the needle on this, and, you know, I appreciate that this committee is committed to this process, you know, I want to see us as part of that restart and that smart restart that Alan Don talks about is, you know, businesses closing downtown. How much are you going to do as a chamber to help businesses consider the neighborhoods, right? Businesses that need larger spaces. And you can't do that if you're not really setting some aspirational, some big goals. You got to think big. And I think that one of the frustrations with people, and hopefully it will not be reflected in this election, I hope people come out. People are frustrated because we've had these conversations before. And so we're looking for something different. It has to feel different. And part of feeling different is a recognition of where you are and where you're not, right, as a member. So speak to me about what framework, what in your current system allows you to create a profile of your business membership that allows us to see, right, that we're going to be more transparent in the relationship.
Well, thank you for that question, Councilwoman. And we currently right now have a breakdown of our membership, and it's on our website for public consumption. And you can change the form by particular demographic. So if you want to say African American owned businesses, you can click that, and it will show all the African American owned businesses. It will show the women owned businesses and so forth. And so what I talked about in the 3 Bs is following best practices in that regard. I think that's important for anybody and any government entity, any nonprofit like the chamber or any public private entity. We want to put in place a mechanism that we will be able to set those baselines, be able to set benchmarks, and then have people employ best practices from across the world if necessary. I mean, there are several people who are experts in the space of diversity, equity, inclusion. We don't have to reinvent the wheel as a chamber. We need to be able to bring people in and to talk to us like we do on a regular basis with our over 300 events. That's what we have experts talk about different things. And this is the priority for hopefully forever to make sure that there's equity and inclusion in our business community. And so I don't want to say exactly how we're doing it because once again, we're constructing that, but what we're talking about is ensuring that there are experts involved who do this, who understand how these metrics work and how they can work best, and engaging with them to help us build.
Thank you. Again, the workforce development component, I think this crisis is a real opportunity as the chairman was saying, we really do have to reimagine. And that's the space that I'm in, is sort of like, I've had the conversation for 33 years. We really got to reimagine and refocus in a way. And the chamber, because of the equity, the stature that you have, has to lead that discussion in a real, as you said, intentional and focused way. But part of it is owning where you are, right? And that how are you transparent on that is going to be telling about how this process is going to be different. And so we look forward to that, because again, I've participated in many of the conversations and I'm encouraged, right? I'm a little bit more positive right now. I'm encouraged. But ultimately, again, when I'm having a conversation with a barber, who comes visit me at my house to tell me how this industry, to Councilmember Gautier's, where sometimes that's the only opportunity returning citizens and others have, and they have to walk away from that, right? Here again, we created an obstacle that, for folks. Last night and then watching the debate, I was very frustrated because I didn't have answers for him, and I couldn't reassure him that those people who own their private businesses or had a chair and were independent contractors, I couldn't really say anything encouraging about their ability to go back to that, right? And so now they're in logistics and they're earning less than $15 an hour when they own their own chair, they own their own business, they have their own clients. It's like they're starting over. And really feeling like, we're not giving them a pathway to that independence. And again, that's a challenge for all of us, right? I just want to make sure. I couldn't say anything to him last night to assure him that this conversation was going to be different, and I felt frustrated for that.
Well, let me say, Councilwoman, first of all, and we do appreciate you having participated in a lot of our programming and in our City Hall Connected series and our Roadmap for Growth series. And this is something that you've been on for a long time, and I know you really want to see the needle moved in this regard, as probably even more than I do. So we look forward to continue to work with you in any type of ideas that you have. It's really key, and I said this at the top of my testimony. The collaboration is key, particularly right now, because you have businesses dying at market rates. Obviously, people have been getting sick and passing away, but businesses have also been doing that, and it's an unhealthy business environment, and we have to be able to work together and triage these businesses and help them, keep them on life support, and then help revive them and help them to recover for this region. And we have to do that in an inclusive way. It has to be that way, and I can't stress it enough. I'm in the executive committee meetings. Claire is there, and they are talking about this. I have further encouragement from being in those meetings, and they're talking about it to the extent that we should be talking about equity and inclusion. And I will say, look towards the future. We're going to continue to collaborate with you, and you will see some that needle moving further soon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know that one of the frustrating things for Rob Wonderling is the 157 steps to opening up a business. And I know you co-chaired our regulatory committee. I think it's time to kind of reset that a little bit too and look at those ways. One of the things that we have found through this process, as you heard from our CDFIs, we have a lot of issues with business being compliant because we have a lot of rules. And I think let us do that in tangent. Let us show good faith to businesses by figuring out how we make 157 steps, 50, and show that we want people compliant. And I know people want to be compliant, but there's some space for us for some improvement. So thank you for again continuing to host these public conversations and your commitment to this work. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Councilmember Sanchez. And we've been taking some progress in that regard, but then COVID just knocked us off our platform. So we're going to have to continue to focus on this and use new technology. I know you're familiar with L9 Eclipse. Luckily, that launched right before COVID, but we got to continue to push forward in spite of the pandemic that has impacted so many in our day-to-day lives. Next, we'll hear from Councilmember Brooks, and then go back to Councilmember Gilmore-Richardson, and then we'll get to our next and final panel.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, everyone on this call. So you mentioned, or I think Member Don talked about the systemic issues around just workforce development and building entrepreneurship in the city. And you also mentioned the work that you're doing around reentry, around youth, and around training. But I'm also concerned on how or what are you doing to eliminate some of these barriers? And I know a barrier is capital, but in this post-COVID world, we have thousands of people that won't go back to work. We have so many people that may be interested in starting a business. But the thought of starting a business and building capital is difficult when you don't even have a stable place to stay. So I know real estate and development all falls under the chambers. Are those folks also a part of the conversation in what it looks like to restart our economy post-COVID? And what does that look like? Because in order for us to build new entrepreneurs, we need to make sure that people are stabilized. And people can't think about starting a business if they don't have or don't have a clue on where they're going to stay next. So are they a part of the conversation as well?
Claire, you want to jump in on that one?
I can find my unmute button. So I think, are you asking specifically about the real estate community, whether they were engaged in this process? Or I apologize if you wouldn't mind restating the question, Councilwoman Brooks.
So part of the question is, when we think about workforce development, we also need workforce housing. And we realize there's not enough low-income, affordable housing in the city. And we also realize that many people are about to lose what they call home right now. So when we're talking about restarting the economy, and we know jobs aren't coming back as well, are the folks that have the power to assist, to help stabilize folks, to focus on building business and restabilizing our workforce at the table and a part of this conversation in a way to really help us promote some growth here in the city?
Well, you actually, I don't know if you're better to comment on that.
Let me jump.
To the point of just the 8 areas of focus from the original Recharge Task Force, I think the question that you're asking was not explicitly part of those 8 subcommittees. The challenges I think that you're describing were an important part of the conversations that occurred across many of those subcommittees. And we can make sure that we send as a follow-on, if it's helpful, the resource we've developed, the hub where we're hosting all this information that describes what those 8 groups are, the aspirations we talked about, and the key short-term actions. But it was not a separate subcommittee discussion, because we really wanted to thread through those sort of key foundational community challenges across all of the discussions, and they were more industry focused than whether it was housing or transportation or some of those other foundational conversations. But I'm not sure I'm explicitly answering your question either.
Let me jump in really quickly. Now that I understand your question further, there was a subcommittee that had to do with construction and manufacturing altogether, but the committee itself, the task force itself, was more focused on business recovery and economic recovery for businesses. It wasn't necessarily focused on housing and the things that you're talking about. I know that is one of your key issues and something that you were focused on. But this particular committee was really focused on short-term and long-term goals for economic recovery for business and workforce. And totally understanding your point in that it helps to have a stable foundation, and it's probably necessary to be able to further grow from there. But I can say that this subcommittee didn't broach that deeply.
Thank you.
Does that complete your questions, Councilmember Brooks?
Yep, I'm done.
Okay. Thank you. We'll now go to Council Member Catherine Gilmore Richardson. I actually misspoke. We actually do have two more panels, and we'll start those two panels after Council Member Gilmore Richardson's questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I'll be quick and brief. My last two questions for this panel center around the green economy and how you are prioritizing that economy in your recovery efforts. And then secondly, I wanted to mention, because I saw this message on Facebook, and we know that we interact with our constituents on a variety of mediums, but it was specifically about the CEO Access Program. And I wanted to know if you all were considering changing the parameters of that program now in this post-COVID environment. Particularly the constituents stated that for the program, you have to demonstrate annual sales of at least $500,000 and an increase from the prior year. And they were also concerned that the definition of small businesses does not match the SBA's definition. So can you speak to if you all are considering changing the criteria for the CEO Access Program, and then what you're doing around the green economy and the green economy recovery? Thank you.
All right. Not necessarily a focus on the green economy itself. I know that the CEO network, Access Network, has been working with, is a cohort of obviously regional CEOs that work with up and coming individuals who own businesses, so they can learn the skills from those particular experts in that area and leaders in those areas. But I don't have right now any substantive information about the green economy itself. And maybe I know that maybe that's something that we can inject into the conversation. Obviously, for some time, the building construction code has had bonuses for green roofs and things like that, and other advancements in sustainability. But at least in the conversations that I participated in, we didn't talk too much about the green economy. There are, however, if you're talking about jobs in the green economy, I think that's another sector that we can look at even further, because we want to look at across, and Councilman Green will like this, every form of human endeavor, every field of human endeavor, to look at what is possible for growth in our city and making sure that there's inclusive growth in those areas. And the green economy is obviously something that's going to be moving forward at an aggressive rate. And so that's something we need to look at, and we can further talk with you about that.
I'll only add to Will's point. I think neither of us are equipped to speak to the details of CEO Access program on this call, but I think we can certainly take that back to the team and ask the question that you're posing for sure.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the latitude.
Thank you, Councilmember Gilmore Richardson. Our next panel will be Ms. McConnell from Philadelphia Association of CDCs, and Ms. Smith from Penn Future. I want to thank our last panel for your information, as well as my council members for providing great questions. We'll continue to dream of better futures for our city, and we'll keep achieving and follow Mr. Carr's perspective of making sure we maximize all forms of human endeavor through achievement. With that, if we can have Ms. McConnell, Ms. Smith, please state your name for the record and your organization, and then proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Chairperson Green and Chairperson Squilla. My name is Beth McConnell. I'm the Policy Director at the Philadelphia Association of CDCs. It's good to see all of your faces this morning. I submitted some longer written testimony for the July hearing, so I'm going to just kind of summarize a few things and just update you on a few things that have happened since July. For the last 7 years, just by way of background, I've convened PACDC's Commercial Corridor Working Group. It's a monthly gathering of staff that manage between 20 to 30 of our neighborhood commercial corridors, including CDCs and bids. And I just want to first just make sure everybody understands that the work that these corridor managers have done through COVID and continue to do has just really underscored how vital they are in helping us recover from this crisis and manage the crisis. They've been the direct conduit to small businesses to get them enrolled in the PPP program, get them access to other sorts of grants and loans, keep them updated on rules around limits to business activity and closure. They work with store owners whose properties were either destroyed or damaged in recent social uprisings to clean it up, secure the storefronts, and find resources to repair and rebuild and restock. They've served as translators for business owners. And as I mentioned in the last hearing, even really provided emotional support, which is not something they've been trained for, but it's been really challenging as we see business owners who've worked for their whole lives to see their business slip away from something that they can't control. And so they've been the people on the ground there that have been working directly with them. I do want to also really applaud Commerce and PIDC and the CDFIs. Since pre-COVID, but certainly during COVID, we've worked very closely. We have a weekly meeting with Commerce and Philadelphia LISC to coordinate our work and activities to support commercial corridors. The programs that the CDFIs or the grant funds that the CDFIs have made available have been extraordinarily helpful in reaching some of the smallest businesses that could not access PPP or other programs that just are not well, we're not well kind of geared towards some of our smallest and most disadvantaged businesses. And the grant program that Commerce and PIDC worked on to quickly get resources out the door early in the crisis really provided a lifeline. It wasn't a lot of resources because they just didn't have them, but at least could help some businesses get through a month or so. And I also I want to acknowledge the importance of the work to kick off the PHL-TCB program has been at this time, because if we're going to recover from this, these corridors need to be kept clean. They need to be safe, clean, well lit. That's the mantra that we know. And so expanding the cleaning programs not only is important for opportunities for job access for the cleaning staff, but their eyes and ears on the street, and they're going to be vital, and they are vital in helping attract more foot traffic back and more businesses to open. Just to comment on a few of the key challenges that we're facing, I think at the beginning of this pandemic, if I could go back in time to a year ago, I think the first thing we would have done is work much more aggressively on data collection and a data management system. We just don't know how many businesses on our corridors are sit-down restaurants or takeout restaurants, how many are beauty salons or nail salons or corner groceries. We don't know what language their business owner speaks, so we don't necessarily always know what materials need to be translated or what interpreters need to be available. We don't know who takes e-commerce and who doesn't. There's a whole range of other data points on our corridors that we really don't have in any sort of centralized way that allows us to both administer programs and evaluate what's working. We have bits and pieces of data in a million different places. And we've been working with Commerce and with their support to try to address that issue and start to build out that database. And I can talk more about that if there's time. The other thing I want to acknowledge, of course, is, as everybody knows, rents come due, right? Some of these grant programs have been helpful in helping the business owners pay back rent or stay on top of rent or pay partial rent. But those resources are running out. They've gotten them by month, $5,000 here, $5,000 there. But at a time when their revenues are significantly down, being able to work with their landlords to come up with payment agreements or renegotiate leases is a complicated system because banks sometimes can be involved that own the mortgages on those properties. So it really a comprehensive thought about how we're going to help these business owners and the landlords that own those properties that are sometimes small business owners themselves kind of get through this situation. And the other thing that I think is a big challenge for our commercial corridors is in the past, in order to drive foot traffic to the corridors, they relied on lots of events and festivals that we just can't do anymore. So we need to really rethink how we market these corridors to bring business back, to bring shoppers back, and to keep them vibrant. And then finally, I want to just mention vacancy is going to be a huge challenge. It's still too early to know what we're looking at, how many businesses will or won't reopen. And again, we have that data challenge of not really knowing who has or hasn't reopened in any sort of centralized way. And so I think that's a challenge, and we really need a multi-pronged strategy that's going to be different on every corridor. I think one part of that strategy is figuring out how to take advantage of the moment where we may see more vacancy to increase local ownership of those properties and ownership by businesses of color. The other, I think, challenge, but is also an opportunity, is when those spaces become vacant, there's an opportunity for rehab and repair to make them and put them in way better condition than they were before, and get them rental ready. We don't really have a lot of resources to do that. So that's a huge challenge. And then I think also connecting our entrepreneurship programs with kind of retail recruitment on our corridors. So we're moving folks that want to start new businesses or are starting new businesses and really encouraging them to do a brick and mortar business on our corridor, I think is another kind of connection that I think can be made a little bit stronger. And as you all know, capital access for businesses owned by people of color, it continues to be a challenge, whether it's a new business or an existing business. And I know many of you have been working on that for a while. So I want to close just by saying a few things that we're doing. In addition to working with Commerce and LISC on that data program, we have also rolled out a pilot program on 4 commercial corridors that is creating a kind of data management program to both collect and analyze and evaluate that data. A whole bunch of different points of data, from who owns the building to what kind of business is in there, how many employees they have, a whole range of other things. We are about to launch an onboarding program for new commercial corridor managers to help prepare them for the work that they're about to do in this incredibly new environment. It's a kind of corridor management than they had done before. And so we really want to prepare them to be the best professionals they can be to support our businesses strongly. And then similarly, we're about to launch, this will probably all be in January, actually do the launch, a kind of problem-solving learning lab where we'll bring some of the more experienced corridor managers together to grapple with these issues, like what do we do that we can't do any more festivals and events? What do we do when other kind of COVID-related challenges like access to e-commerce continue to be real big challenges on our corridors? And I'll close by just mentioning, in case no one has mentioned it already, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia is putting out a survey. I think its deadline is October 31st, to try to gather some more data from our small businesses. And the Merchants Fund is encouraging, and I think if I understand, Commerce is also participating in this, PACDC and LISC, to all use the same survey link, because if we get a certain number of businesses using that same link to fill out the survey, we'll get access to the data, which I think will be really useful for us here in Philly. So I can share that link with staff.
My testimony. I'm the Philadelphia campaign manager for Penn Future, and we are a statewide environmental advocacy organization. Our team is working daily to protect public health and restore and protect natural resources and move Pennsylvania towards a clean energy future. And so I'm here today to speak about how we can address the crises that our city is facing by focusing on building a green economy and by investing in green space for our city. What this pandemic has really exposed is the fragile foundation that our political economy has been built upon, and the reliance on fossil fuels that has really led to the divestment of our neighborhoods and historic neglect. During the pandemic, Penn Future, we spent time producing a platform for a green stimulus and economic recovery from COVID-19, which focuses on opportunities to invest in the environment and invest in a green economy in order to recover. What COVID also exposed is that our communities are not prepared to respond to the climate crisis. We saw flooding occur during heavy storms in neighborhoods of Eastwick, and communities are still struggling to recover from the flooding. And also we know that neighborhoods of Hunting Park and Point Breeze continue to struggle under the urban heat island effect, which is really the cause caused by redlining, but it has been, but the urban heat island effect has been created by density of asphalt pavement and roofs, and a lack of trees and green space. And those communities suffer under a 22-degree temperature difference during high heat months. And so when we think about recovering from COVID, we know we need to grow our local economy by investing in green space. And so there are ways that this is happening in our city currently, and we can continue to focus on these strategies to help us recover. And one of those approaches that I just want to highlight today is the success that the city has had with the Green City Clean Waters program that is being run by the Water Department. This is a program that relies on partnerships with businesses, with nonprofits, with environmental communities. And it is an innovative approach to stormwater management. Over the course of the program since 2011, it has created over 1,000 jobs for the city, and it has an $89 million economic impact annually. And it's also investing in historically neglected neighborhoods. And this is, and we know this, it's investing in green space and reducing the impacts of the urban heat island effect. And we know that investment in green space improves the quality of life, creates access to opportunities for recreation, which are so needed right now during COVID, and reduces crime and blight. It is also, along with creating jobs, there are programs in the city like the Power Corps PHL that is providing job opportunity paths for youth and returning citizens. However, the Water Department and water utilities across the country have been hit hardest by COVID-19. They have enacted moratoriums on water shutoffs, knowing that water is an essential public service during this time for public health and the environment, and they've experienced a loss of revenue. And nationwide, water utilities have experienced an impact of $27 billion. So growing the green economy really requires a thoughtful consideration into our priorities as a city, and considering how we're going to incorporate innovative financing mechanisms to grow the green economy, mechanisms like the creation of a green bank or green bonds. Future is currently participating in a study with the University of Maryland Environmental Finance Center to investigate and research strategies for creative financing opportunities for green stormwater infrastructure for the city. And we look forward to presenting those to this body in 2021. And we also know that recovery can't place a heavy burden on residents or rely on austerity measures. Austerity measures during the 2008 economic recession has led to entrenched racial inequity and continuing to cause environmental harm. So job cuts, privatization, layoffs are not the way forward, but creative and strategies for funding and financing. City Council can work with the federal government to call for a stimulus for sustainability and water infrastructure funding. Up until this point, there has been no stimulus funding for water infrastructure, and we need to work with our federal delegation in order to access those stimulus dollars for our water utilities. And also at the state legislature, the Green Stimulus for Recovery platform I mentioned at the beginning is focused on state level actions that can be taken with our delegation in Harrisburg. So partnering with our state delegation to advance strategies for a green economy are important to our city's overall recovery from the coronavirus. And I'd be happy to share with this platform with all of you. So I'd just like to close by restating our support for local green economy strategies to address the crises that we are currently facing by investing in the people and neighborhoods of Philadelphia. And thank you again for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you both for your testimony. I think both of your information and the remarks you provided really highlight some of the things I talked about regarding resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, and reform. I think from the work that Ms. McConnell, you're doing with Philadelphia Association CDCs is really helping a lot of our small neighborhood-based businesses on our commercial corridors really trying to get through this issue of COVID from that lens of, resolve and resilience and return. And Ms. Smith, in your commentary, really made me think about some of the reimagination and reform that we need to do and how COVID has had such an impact. When you talk about the flooding in Eastwood and some of the other environmental challenges, it made me reflect on issues in other parts of the country. My sister is a physician in California. She's a geriatrician. And when you had the massive wildfires that were occurring in California, and when we have a pandemic like COVID and people have to be outside, but you can't be outside because the air quality is so poor based on the massive wildfires. That gives additional thoughts how we need to reimagine as we move forward and deal with some of the environmental issues that you talked about. So I want to thank both of you for your testimony. I know we have questions from the council members, Jamie Gauthier, as well as Catherine Gilmore-Richardson.
Good morning. Thank you both for your testimony. I have a comment and a question for Beth. I share your concern about property ownership on our corridors right now. I think we're in a vulnerable space. On many of my corridors, I already had a lot of speculation. And so it's sort of a prime time for investors that, could be from anywhere to kind of swoop in, grab properties and fill them with uses that don't meet the vision that the community has for the corridor or the needs of the people who live in the area. And so I think it will be important for us to work with our CDCs and mobilize some capital so that we can control more of the properties, particularly key properties where we can get anchor businesses in that will really help to advance corridors. And so I don't have a ready-made solution to that. I just wanted to say that I'd be very interested in working with PACDC and Commerce on a solution. And I think that issue is really critical. One thing that strikes me, I've been going around and visiting a lot of the small businesses on my corridors and following the civil unrest. And one thing that strikes me is that we have businesses that have such unique products and services, and I think they would really benefit from online marketing, but they don't have, a knowledge of the technology, nor do they have staff to really assist them with implementing an online marketing strategy on a consistent basis. So I wanted to know, has PACDC and others been thinking about this issue, particularly as foot traffic is way down, right? But I just continue to believe that we could be doing more to help these businesses to reach consumers that really would, want to patronize them. So please discuss any discussions that you've been having in that area.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'd love to comment on both issues. So on the e-commerce issue, we've definitely identified the significant need for kind of one-on-one business technical assistance. I think the way that we've done, and I'm so glad you brought this up because I forgot to mention this, the way that we've done business technical assistance is pre-COVID, right? It's a different model where we have a number of RFPs that we put out and entities reply to them and say, this is the expertise I have, I can offer. Commerce contracts with those entities, and it's really a referral system. So we got to get the business to call the technical assistance provider, the right technical assistance provider that can provide what they need. And there's many of them, so sometimes that can be a little bit of a process. There's real value in a system like that, but I think we also need a system that's a little bit more proactive. And that includes TA providers that can help people do e-commerce, get them online and reach the customers, as you pointed out. We also need folks that can help people with lease negotiations, which was not as much of, it's always been an issue, but it's just one that we've never been able to address, and it's a bigger issue now. Other kinds of legal assistance and legal representation, which we haven't done through the BTAP program in the past. So we have been working with Commerce and actually trying to raise some money to see if we could, from federal sources, expand the BTAP program to be more proactive in that way, and specifically proactive with e-commerce. It hasn't materialized yet, but we're still working on it. So I raised that point, and I also I forgot to mention we've also been in communication with the Commerce Court with Judge Gary Glazer about making this part of a whole system to help businesses that have other forms of debt, whether it's back rent, back mortgage, suppliers, other things, a combination of kind of legal assistance and business technical assistance to help them and leverage the new Commerce Court process. So they're not just going in there trying to negotiate with their debtors without any help, but that we're building a whole system around them that's modeled on the mortgage foreclosure and eviction diversion programs with all the kind of wraparound support. The last thing I'll say just about the ownership, building ownership and vacancy, there are a couple products out there. PIDC has one to help small businesses buy their buildings. Commerce has put one out to help CDCs purchase buildings on corridors so they can be the landlord and be thoughtful about, affordable rents and the right retail mix. But I would say another thing that's really needed, we have a limited number of CDCs that have the capacity to actually do property management, that know, how you collect the rent and how you do the maintenance. And so there's also kind of a need to build capacity there so that more of them can come into that role too. And the resources that are out there that Commerce has and PIDC has are useful, but not enough, right? So we definitely need more because there's enough to buy a couple buildings, but probably not a lot more than that. I also just want to acknowledge that I'd love to have a longer conversation with the Land Bank and Council about what role the Land Bank can play in commercial property acquisition, because they've been very focused on residential and the commercial has been kind of, we're not there yet. It's not the only tool, right? Because a lot of the properties are in private ownership that aren't tax delinquent. So it's not the tool for everything, but we need all the tools, right? And some kind of coordinated strategy. So thank you for those comments and questions.
Thank you. I would love to have a longer conversation offline about everything that you just discussed, because I think the businesses in my district could benefit from all of that. So look forward to working together.
Thank you, Councilmember Gauthier. Next, we'll have Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, and then we'll have our final panel, which will be our Acting Commerce Director, Sylvia Gaye-Howard, and Ann Bovair-Nevins from PIDC.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to thank you both for your testimony, but especially thank Lena and Penn Future for your advocacy and for your continued partnership in helping us think through how we will build resilient green economy post-COVID in Philadelphia, but also for highlighting how years of divestment has really led to a disproportionate negative impact for our most vulnerable communities throughout the city, for individuals and communities who are facing the effects of COVID-19. So I just wanted to put that on the record to thank you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you and with Penn Future as a part of our citizen environmental advisory groups for our subcommittees with the Committee on Environment. So thank you very, very much for all of your work and just for your continued partnership and helping us think this through. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, Ms. McConnell, Ms. Smith, for your testimony and your continued advocacy and work in this space as we continue to move forward through this pandemic and helping our local economy. At this point, I would like to call our final panel, which is Sylvia Gaye-Howard, our Acting Commerce Director, and Ann Bovair-Nevins from PIDC. If you both can state your names and titles for the record and then proceed with your testimony. One thing I would be remiss in not saying this on the record. Last week during Council's fiscal stability hearing chaired by Councilmember Dom, I was very critical of the administration based on the fact that we had not allocated federal CARES dollars for small business recovery. I know both of you have been very active in trying to raise money to help small businesses and even launch, which I think is one of the nation's first small business recovery initiative which was the PHL COVID-19 Loan and Grant Fund. Various colleagues from National League of Cities, where I serve as a board member, and other organizations which I'm involved in, had interest and reached out regarding that program. And then we sort of got behind the eight ball, and other jurisdictions were able to kind of move more ahead of us. In particular, I made reference to Montgomery County last week and how they allocated $10 million from their federal CARES dollars to augment the state initiative that Jim Burnett and Dan Betancourt talked about earlier in this hearing. But I have to commend the administration because the day after that hearing with Councilmember Dom, our acting Commerce Director announced a $20 million allotment of our federal CARES dollars towards that initiative. Now, in earlier part of our hearing, what Mr. Burnett and Mr. Betancourt talked about is that for us to be comparable to our other counties, we would probably need to identify another $60 million from those federal CARES dollars. So we'll be continuing to look for information from our finance director to see how those federal CARES dollars will be allocated. I know the numbers are shifting, but we also have to spend the money by the end of December. So I just want to thank both of you for your leadership, not only with the PHL COVID-19 Small Business Grant and Relief Fund. I know we spent many long days and then had Monday evening calls on a regular basis at 7:30 p.m. A couple times a week for a couple of weeks and helping to raise money for that. So I want to thank both of you for your efforts and also your advocacy on behalf of small businesses in our city.
Thank you, Councilman. I guess, should I go first? All right. So good morning, Chairperson Squilla, Chairperson Green, members of the Joint Committee on Finance and Commerce and Economic Development. My name is Sylvie Gallier-Howard, and I'm the Acting Director of Commerce. Thank you for having me here today to provide testimony on Resolution 200336 regarding Philadelphia's safe, equitable, and robust economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic is a public health crisis which has precipitated an economic crisis that is unlike anything we've seen in our lifetimes. Throughout the last 6 months, millions of Americans have gone on unemployment while businesses have struggled to survive and many have closed permanently. This crisis has also had a devastating impact on the city's ability to serve its residents, creating an unprecedented $749 million hole in the city's FY21 operating budget. While there are some signs that things are beginning to improve from where we were this spring, we're not through this crisis yet, and the reality is that our economic recovery will not happen overnight or in the V-shape that economists had hoped for early on. Here in Philadelphia, the total of non-farm payroll jobs stood at 680,000 in August of this year. The good news is that this is up from the nadir of this crisis in April when we had only 651,000 jobs, but it's 70,000 jobs fewer than we had in February. That's 70,000 jobs right before this crisis hit, and 50,000 jobs fewer than we had 1 year ago. Sadly, our unemployment rate continues to climb. The most recent statistic, actually in my testimony, it says the most recent statistic is available from July, but I actually just got August, which is at 15.4% unemployment for Philadelphia in August. That is still about a threefold increase from where we were before the crisis. I mentioned the last time that I was here in August that when we look at unemployment claims, we see a troubling and continuous 30 percentage point disparity between Black and white claimants. This is a painful reminder that when an economic crisis hits, the most vulnerable among us bear the brunt. This is where we stand today, but this isn't where we'll always be. Working together, we can and will emerge with an economy that is more resilient, more inclusive, and more equitable than ever before. And the way that we'll do that is by continuing to pursue the goals and objectives outlined in our 2019 Inclusive Growth Strategy, as well as implementing on the 4-pillar Inclusive Recovery Plan that we released on September 10th. This plan, titled Respond, Restart, Recharge, Reimagine, almost the same R's as yours, Councilman Green, an equitable and inclusive economic recovery for Philadelphia, puts forth our framework for economic recovery to ensure that we're working interdepartmentally and across sectors to support residents and businesses alike, and to make the investments and create the systems that will allow for economic mobility and growth into the future. I also want to highlight some of the actions that have been taken since we last met in August. The city committed, as you mentioned, an additional $20 million in CARES funding to the PA statewide small business relief program to help small businesses in Philadelphia weather the continuing effects of the pandemic. This is obviously a significant sum, and we expect to support about 1,000 businesses, and the average grant size will be between $15,000 and $20,000 per business. We thank this body for your leadership of this effort. It's important to note that with this allocation, the city has now committed more than $33 million to small business relief, representing 10% of the city's total CARES funding, and will help save businesses and protect thousands of jobs. We launched the $1 million Call for Ideas to identify innovative and workforce development interventions to connect residents laid off from low-wage jobs to sustainable living wage positions in growing industries. We put out a $500,000 call for proposals for our initiative called Philadelphia Most Diverse Tech Hub to increase diversity in technology and connect Philadelphians to opportunities in this field. The Department of Commerce will be investing in ideas that train, prepare, and connect Black and Brown people to careers in tech, while also supporting underrepresented founders and strengthening partnerships between local colleges and universities, as well as historically Black colleges and universities and tech companies. The Department of Commerce has been involved in fostering a number of important economic wins for Philadelphia in recent weeks, including securing Hilco's commitment to convert the site of the old refinery to a state-of-the-art logistics hub, while also supporting CTE education in the school district, contracting with more minority-owned businesses, and creating 19,000 jobs over the next 10 years. Similarly, development deals at Penn's Landing and the Navy Yard continue to attract significant investment to Philadelphia. Working interdepartmentally, and I know this came up earlier, we've established a business response team to help solve complex problems and address industry-wide concerns that businesses have. Businesses should continue to use the Office of Business Services as the point of contact, and issues will be escalated to the business response team as necessary. OBS can be reached by emailing business@phila.gov or calling 683-2100. But as I said, our recovery won't happen overnight, and it's critical we think about laying the foundation that will foster resiliency and growth in the long term. This can only happen through partnership and collaboration with the private sector and our region. That's why the Department of Commerce is proud to partner closely in the Chamber's Regional Recharge and Recovery Task Force, as well as the Equitable Entrepreneurship Assessment and Strategy led by the United Way of Southeastern PA and Southern New Jersey, and the Workforce Respawn and Recharge Plan with Philadelphia Works. Like so many other places around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a devastating, in some ways life-altering economic impact on Philadelphia. But Philadelphia has overcome major obstacles before, and we've always been a place of resilience and innovation. We can channel that ingenuity, tenacity, and can-do spirit to tackle these new challenges head-on, and we'll be laser-focused about making our city a better, more inclusive place. It won't be easy, it won't happen overnight, but by working together to respond to the moment, we can work to reimagine how our economy works for everyone, a more inclusive, robust economy that will help ensure long-term prosperity for all. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson Green and members of the Joint Committee. My name is Ann Bovaird-Nevins, and I'm the president of the Philadelphia Industrial Development Corporation, or PIDC. I also want to thank and acknowledge both Councilmember Jones and Councilmember Johnson for their service on our board of directors. As the resolution calling for this hearing has noted, the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on Philadelphia's citizens and small businesses was sudden, severe, and widespread, and that this burden was not evenly distributed, but rather has been significantly greater for our Black and Brown citizens, our historically disadvantaged businesses, and also our young people. PIDC is fully and strongly aligned with City Council's call for Philadelphia's safe, equitable, and robust economic recovery from the coronavirus pandemic. And we're very open to engaging and hearing your feedback and continuing to learn and adapt to best meet the needs of our community. As I noted in my prior testimony before this committee in August, PIDC is approaching our COVID-19 economic recovery strategies through the lens of our vision for a Philadelphia economy that is growing, diversified, and inclusive in order to achieve a high quality of life for all those who live and work here. You have heard previously from me, as well as just now from Sylvie, about our 4 phases of work to drive an equitable economic recovery in Philadelphia. And those 4 phases are respond, restart, recharge, and reimagine. In June, PIDC issued a Restart Action Plan, which outlined how we are adapting our 3 core strategies to meet Philadelphia's immediate needs to drive an equitable economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We published that plan on our website and have been reporting out monthly to our stakeholders and to the public via our newsletter, blog, and social media on some of the key actions that we are taking to help restart Philadelphia's economy. I'd like to offer a specific example from that Restart Action Plan. In the plan, we committed to deploy flexible and affordable capital to small and mid-sized businesses with a specific focus on Black and Brown-owned businesses and those located in low-income communities to support reopening or adapting their business practices. Acting on this commitment, PIDC applied for and successfully secured nearly $7 million in new lending capital from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, or EDA. We are using these funds to develop and launch the Restart Philadelphia Loan Fund, which is providing 0% financing in amounts ranging from $25,000 up to $250,000 to small businesses to help them recover from the impact of COVID-19. We also use this as an opportunity to make changes to how we develop pipeline and intake and approve applications. So we pushed out the Restart Loan Fund with very clearly stated priorities to provide funds to businesses located in high poverty census tracts and to historically disadvantaged businesses, opened a window of time to submit basic inquiries with a very short form to minimize the burden on the businesses, and then invited businesses to move forward into a streamlined underwriting and approval process by completing an application, and we prioritize those based on our stated criteria. To date, we've invited over 120 businesses to apply. Of these, 50% are Black or African American owned, 20% are Asian or Asian American owned, and 15% are Hispanic owned. Nearly half of those businesses are women owned. These requests were prioritized and invited to apply based on the census tract and demographic information. And the businesses are located in areas with an average poverty rate of 34%. So far, PIDC has approved 7 restart loans totaling about $1 million in capital, which 4 are Black-owned businesses, 1 is a Hispanic-owned business, and 5 are owned or co-owned by women. An additional 3 loans for $375,000 are being presented for approval this week, and an additional 24 loans totaling $4.2 million are in our underwriting pipeline. And these numbers will continue to grow as the first rounds of applications are received and processed. At the same time, PIDC, specifically through our CDFI, PIDC Community Capital, has been actively participating in the statewide coalition that is delivering the COVID-19 Relief Pennsylvania Small Business Assistance Program. This program, which is the one you heard about earlier this morning, developed in partnership with 17 CDFIs across the Commonwealth and leveraging the many lessons that PIDC had learned from administering the Small Business Relief Fund in partnership with the City for Philadelphia, has prioritized businesses owned by low-income people, businesses located in communities with high poverty and high unemployment, as well as the types of businesses that were hardest hit by the pandemic. As you heard earlier, to date, more than $20 million has been committed to more than 1,100 Philadelphia businesses, of which 75% are going to historically disadvantaged businesses. We, as a network, will be announcing the second round of grants shortly, but we know already that there continues to be a significant gap in the demand specifically for these types of resources for Philadelphia businesses. We greatly appreciate the additional $20 million in CARES Act funding that the City of Philadelphia is contributing to this program, specifically to go to Philadelphia businesses, and we thank City Council and the Commerce Department for their strong support of this effort. We have actually, one thing I wanted to note about the Pennsylvania CDFI network and the statewide program is that my colleague at PIDC, who has our marketing team, has served as the chair of the communications committee for that group and has been working tirelessly across the state in partnership with all of the other CDFIs to promote the program. One of our responsibilities in managing the communications committee included launching and administering the statewide website at pabusinessgrants.com, for which we engaged Tactile Group, which is a Philadelphia-based Black-owned web development business that also is a PIDC client. While many of Philadelphia's businesses continue to need our help right now to respond to the impact of the pandemic and restart or pivot their operations, we are also looking ahead to the role that PIDC can play in recharging and reimagining Philadelphia's economic future. We are deeply engaged with our partners at the City of Philadelphia, the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Philadelphia, the United Way, the Pennsylvania CDFI Network, and others in strategic planning and attracting new resources. We are actively meeting with and supporting Philadelphia-based businesses who are already in growth mode, as well as new businesses considering Philadelphia as a location in sectors from light manufacturing to distribution to technology. And we are focusing on a whole new paradigm of equitable growth and inclusion at the Navy Yard through the selection of our new development partners, Ensemble Real Estate Investments and Mosaic Development, as well as the launch of a workforce development initiative in partnership with the West Philadelphia Skills Initiative and JP Morgan Chase to engage and underemployed Philadelphia residents with new career pathways for employers at the Navy Yard. I want to note that these are not the right things to do. These are smart investments in the diverse businesses and diverse talent that will drive Philadelphia's economic future. And I really thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you both for your testimony. I see both council members Dom and Jones have questions, as well as council member Gim. One thing that COVID has definitely brought about in a somewhat interesting way is, I'll call it the supremacy of the letter R in the alphabet. And I say that because McKinsey, as I made reference earlier, used a resolve, resilience, return, reimagination, and reform metric in reference to COVID and economic recovery. The Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, as you heard earlier, has a recharge and recovery task force. And from my perspective, the plan that the city has from both Commerce and PIDC is a respond, restart, and reimagine plan to come out of COVID. And so based on all that alliteration with ours, we'll stick to the respond, restart, and reimagination plan that we're talking about now from both Commerce and PIDC as the city's plan to come out of COVID. And you talked about some of the things you're doing. I guess my question is, looking at, and I think Councilmember Sanchez touched on this as well, looking at the over 7,000, I think 7,200 applications we received for requests for funding of about $146 million of requests. And even with additional money that we're putting in now from federal CARES dollars, and if we're able to put even more dollars, that's not nearly going to address how we provide resources to these businesses. So as we look to the next budget process, and I know the various departments are about to now start on that, what would be your thoughts going forward and how we help businesses continue to grow out of this pandemic, even though we have very limited resources to do all that we would like to do, but don't have the ability to do so?
If I can start with that, I did want to respond also to what you said earlier, Councilman. So I just to sort of clarify a little bit, we started talking about whether or not we should do more, provide more funding for small businesses after the first round that was launched in March. We started talking about whether we should have another round early in the summer, and then the state launched the initiative with the CDFI coalition. And when we heard that was getting off the ground, it was actually intentional and strategic to not launch our own thing and to see if we should piggyback and support the state's program if it was successful. So while it might seem that we were behind the 8 ball, we were actually waiting in the wings, sort of ready to do something once we knew more about the results of that program. And that's why we, certainly, the support that you all were and your encouragement was helpful. But we knew we needed to do something. I was certainly having those conversations, and Ann was having those conversations, and many of us were our partners as well. And as Jim Burnett mentioned, we have weekly phone calls. So we were really, really aware of the demand and what the CDFIs have been facing and hearing from the business community. So I think moving forward, it's actually respond, restart, recharge, reimagine. It's a 4-point plan. And I think the thing about the plan is that it's not like, okay, respond is over, now we're in restart mode. It's actually, things happen that we're still constantly responding to, like when the school district decides to go 100% virtual, suddenly we're maneuvering a bunch of people to figure out how we're setting up access centers, or when there's rioting, we're sort of maneuvering to respond to that, and whatever else, might happen in the winter, for example, or when this change is happening to the guidelines. But nonetheless, we have to be doing recharging and reimagining as well. And we need to be setting up all the different types of programs and supports for the future. So that's why Ann and I are working on, we have $2 million between the city and PIDC for a fund for entrepreneurs of color. We would like to grow that very exponentially. $100 million would be great. $2 million is nowhere near enough. So we're talking about how we do that. I heard a lot about technical assistance earlier on in the hearing, and we have our business technical assistance program. We fund about 10 or so organizations, and they actually, some of them are specifically focused on things like building a website or having more of a digital presence. So we've changed that program a little bit to have a little bit more niche areas across the different agencies that provide technical assistance. And we just have to work with our partners. I mean, we have calls weekly with the CDFIs, the CDCs, the BIDs. We also convene a small business coordination meeting with all of the minority chambers and Philly startup leaders. So we're sort of always working with our partners. I know Beth mentioned the weekly calls. We can't do it without working with all of them.
Okay. If there's no additional response to that question, I'll open up to questions from my colleagues. We'll go with Councilmember Dom, then Councilmember Jones, and then Councilmember Ginn, in that order.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ann and Sylvie. And Ann, I want to thank you for all your help you gave us on the loan forbearance program early on. Your team was great, so thank you so much for that. And Sylvie, I want to thank you for taking all of our many phone calls, and there have been a lot of them during this process for various businesses and various issues. I know I texted you this morning about when the salons can start doing facials again, but from all the restaurants, and a lot of the restaurants right now are trying to figure out, how do I operate in colder weather, November, December, January. I know that Vancouver, Canada has some ideas around that, and we'd like to just come up with some solutions so we can offer them, because the more lead time they have, of course, the better it is for them. So one of the questions I had, I don't know if you have the answer, is do we know how many minority-owned and small businesses exist in the city right now, and how many exist post-COVID, like pre-COVID and post-COVID? What did we lose?
So I don't think we actually know what the losses are. We know from the Pew report, we have a sense of sort of the number of businesses, the recent Pew report that came out, and percentages that are sort of new information for us, like the fact that 6% of our businesses are Black-owned employers, 30% are Black-owned, but not all employers. 4% are Latinx-owned employers, 13% are Latinx-owned, not just sole proprietors. So we have some of those types of statistics. I don't think we know yet in terms of racial demographics what we've lost. I don't think we know yet what we've lost, period. It's just kind of too soon to tell. I can say about the outdoor dining. So I mentioned the business response team. We have the business response team led by Justine Bolkus here at Commerce, and I commend her. They had everyday calls at 8:30 with the other departments. Now it's 3 times a week. And they've been coordinating all around, indoor dining, outdoor dining, all these different things. We had a call actually led by Philadelphia with dozens of cities, including Montreal. So we've got a lot of information about heat lamps and tents and all of those types of things, and we're coming up with a plan for that.
Yeah, I will say this: people are loving eating outside. Okay. And we're actually attracting the suburbanites to come into the city. They're saying they love the experience. So in that, trying to bring back the city, it's so crucial. And I will say this, I've come to the conclusion that in many corridors, neighborhoods, whether it's 52nd Street, Germantown Avenue, the restaurants have become the anchor for the other stores, because people go to the restaurants and then either before or after they go shopping. And so it's a very important part of that whole neighborhood. So thank you for all you're doing. Appreciate it. And keep up the good work. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. It's a great hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Dom, Councilmember Jones, and then Councilmember Ginn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you for pulling together this hearing. I think it's an important part of the jumpstart. I want to echo my colleagues' sentiments about both PIDC and the Commerce Department. During this pandemic, you guys stepped up to the plate. Your response for small businesses, both in commercial corridors during the pandemic, but also during some of the uprisings and unfortunate looting were right up front and center. And I'm proud to be an alumni of Commerce and a current executive board member of PIDC. One of the things that was not mentioned as much is the fact that MedWeek starts the first week of October. And it is a time where we recognize the contributions nationally and also locally of small businesses owned by minorities, females, and businesses of color. And we are working in conjunction with you guys to do a post-COVID workshop October 8th, and it'll be the first virtual MedWeek workshop we've ever done. It'll be on Channel 64, also, Mr. Chairman, and are looking for an opportunity both with the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, African American Chamber of Commerce, to highlight the evolution of certain businesses post-COVID. In some of the hearings that we've had with SEPTA, for example, their process of cleaning SEPTA cars has changed pre and post-COVID. Instead of one cleaning maybe a day, they're up to 3 cleanings a day and are looking at chemical treatments that have antimicrobials within the chemicals that last a week, and are looking at new opportunities that last longer. And the days of the janitor with the bucket and the rags in his back pocket no longer exist. We're in a different phase, and as businesses evolve, we want those opportunities to present themselves to small businesses in Philadelphia, whether it is the manufacturing of PPEs, whether it is the contact tracing opportunities that are coming up. We want Philadelphia-based businesses, minority-based businesses that are within your cadre mailing list, loan portfolio list, to look at these opportunities and say, yes, I can. We should absolutely never have to rely on foreign governments for gowns for hospitals and masks for the public. So as we take this, Mr. Chairman, a step further, we need to evolve our small business opportunities and present them to small businesses. So I just want to echo what others have said, that I go back to the alumni days, and this is not our grandparents' Commerce Department nor our grandparents' PIDC. You guys have evolved and are enlightened to the fact that inclusive lending, inclusive marketing, and inclusive technical assistance aren't just the right thing to do, it's good for business. And that is a different mindset than has been heretofore. And I want to thank you for that. I'm done, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman, for bringing up MedWeek. That starting next Monday, really important, and you've been a huge supporter, and we're proud to have you as an alum. And I'm very intrigued by that turtle behind you as well. I just have to say, it's very distracting.
So my nickname as a kid was Turtle, and so I could not resist.
I want to echo that thanks to the councilman for your partnership on MedWeek. We're very excited about that as well. And I also want to note that we are also working on another event that'll be on the 7th with Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson and Councilman Johnson.
Look forward to seeing you, well, virtually, you guys.
Likewise.
Thank you, Councilmember Jones, for your steadfast, ongoing advocacy for MedWeek. When you talked about transitions from COVID, it reminded me of the first time we had this joint hearing, Finance and Commerce Economic Development, when we had David Sims testify about his business. I've known David since back when I actually had some hair, when my wife and I had a retail shoe store on Germantown Avenue, and David had just started, and he was doing catering events at our store, and he was able to transition quite successfully through COVID. He moved his location from Ridge Avenue to Wadsworth. He does traditionally catering, but he transitioned to doing a lot of takeout. I know I've been using him to provide takeout meals to my parents. So your comments reminded me of that. It reminded me of MedWeek. Also, your commentary regarding SEPTA made me reflect on some work I've been doing for a number of months as a part of the Small Diverse Business Community Task Force, which is being led by Carrie Kirkland from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and Mike Brown, 360 CI entrepreneur based in Philadelphia and Florida. And it was based on his work coming out of the hurricanes in Florida, which he learned how the federal task work can be used to help grow businesses. And so we created that small diverse business community task force, and we've been licensing a sanitation product, working with local businesses like Donna Ali from Team Clean and a number of other businesses. We did a demonstration with SEPTA in probably mid-spring, but we're also doing cleaning at the Capitol Complex and also doing work in Pittsburgh. And it's been a task force of people from Philadelphia, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh, including some of the people you're very familiar with, like Della Clark and Joanne Bell and George Burrell and our former Commerce Director, Harold Epps. So even in COVID, we can find new ways to provide a way to respond, restart, recharge, and reimagine as the city is doing through their action plan. And so with that, I will then transfer my microphone to Councilmember Gim for her questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And good afternoon to everybody. I had a couple of questions for PIDC. One, I really appreciate the loan programs and the effort to, in particular, pay attention to small and mid-owned sized businesses. The 0% loan fund for small businesses is an important assistance. But I did want to try to see how, as we look at recovery, how we are looking at things and projects that PIDC both backs and supports beyond just ownership of the company, but that we're looking at projects and other types of things in which we are leveraging the power of public dollars and resources to improve wages, ensure quality conditions for our workers, about how we are also looking at a diversity of resources that could, for example, provide significant amounts of sustainable green new development in communities that are struggling with environmental issues, support for public schools and reimagining public school spaces. I think it's notable that, for example, we've long known about the state of Philadelphia's public school facilities, but today, I think, or it was just announced recently, that a grand jury indicted the Scranton school superintendent and their school board for purposeful neglect of buildings. And I think we've gotten super cynical that somehow, this is a matter of the state. But these are felony charges of neglect. And so we are in a, we as we try to think about recovery, it's recognizing that development is beyond sort of, that there's a lot of interpretation of what development is. And I think it has traditionally been interpreted by many different entities. PIDC honestly has been some of them to perceive of large, expensive, projects. But, we are trying to think through projects that invest in the health and well-being of workers who are Philadelphians. We want to ensure that going forward, they contribute to the environment, to the state of our schools, transit development, affordable housing efforts. All of these things certainly fall within your purview under the definition of development, I would assume. So how are you looking, for example, at PIDC approved projects in terms of workforce improvements and higher wages, benefits, and workforce hiring and diversity?
Sure. So a few things on that, and maybe if I can just start with a few kind of project examples that might help give some context to some of the things that we are doing and I think what we are committed to doing going forward. So looking backwards a little bit, in 2019, so last full year, PIDC invested about $47 million through a variety of loans and new market tax credit type investments in projects throughout Philadelphia. Some examples of those would be the Lasky Labs, which is a mixed-use development from Mosaic Development Partners, minority-owned development firm that is located in Wayne Junction. Another is the new construction. You mentioned education in the school buildings. Another was the construction of the new Peacelands school campus that's co-locating with Powell Elementary and the Science Leadership Academy Middle School in the Palatine section of the city. Another is the Northeast Philadelphia-based campus for PATH, People I Think to Help, which is focused on better serving individuals that need mental, behavioral health, or intellectual disabilities related services, and a new ceramic studio for the Clay Studio in South Kensington. So those are some of the examples of the types of projects that we have been investing our resources in, and that's dating back to 2019. Some of the things that we've approved more recently for this year, kind of along those same lines in terms of our project financing resources, include the new headquarters facility for Supra EMSCO, which is the, again, minority-owned business located in West Philadelphia that is going to be building out a new headquarters and creating a lot of new jobs. Another is the Cobbs Creek Commons, which is a mixed-use project also located in West Philadelphia. So those are some of the types of projects that we've been focusing on in terms of our real estate or development financing resources. And we definitely are certainly focused on, I think, the things, Councilwoman, that you listed in terms of the types of needs in the community around workforce training and development, quality job opportunities. Basically, every project that we fund, whether it's a business or whether it's a development project, we are connecting those projects into the resources at Philadelphia Works. That's a partnership that I've been working a lot in conjunction with Sylvie and the Commerce Department on strengthening. How do we really better connect the businesses or the development projects that we're supporting with the workforce system and make sure that those job opportunities are available to Philadelphians and that those job opportunities really are quality jobs as well.
Yep. If I could be a little bit more specific, I think what I'm interested in is how we are doing a better job. I'm dealing with this on the juvenile justice front, for example. I mean, it's not completely related directly, but we have the power of both our public dollars, our public purse, and to demand that facilities that institutionalize young people have to do X number of things. And it's not just about access, opportunity, and connect. It's about demand. So, for example, if you get a public subsidy, what's the lowest wage that could be offered? Do you demand that it is a $15 a wage job? It's a public subsidy. To me, I think it feels like, there needs to be a clear benefit package, a clear threshold towards what we're getting to for wages, clarity about benefits, healthcare, because we can't afford to have people, as we saw with COVID, completely without healthcare, that we enforce on sick leave, et cetera, et cetera. But like, is that part of it? And is that something that you would consider? Because we are in a world where, I don't want you, look, I think if you were to look at your portfolio, there's no question that you have a range of diversity, but there are larger entities that are getting $7 million grants from PIDC approved projects. And thus, those kinds of larger entities like, hotels or garages or those types of things, we want to make sure that they are giving us the types of jobs that both help reach, our goals, but also bring it up. And I'm specifically talking about wages, because I think more than anything else, if there's a large scale entity, we want to ensure that our large amounts of tax subsidies will not subsidize low wage jobs.
Sure. Yep. I understand. Sorry, there's a virtual school break going on in the background. So yes, I think I understand what you're speaking to with respect to the hotel project, and if that's specifically the W element, then that project, which now is I hope getting ready to open after a long time coming, is one that had a set of kind of capital associated with it, and a set of agreements that were determined at the time. We haven't, to my knowledge or recollection, financed any hotels since that time, and certainly not using the tax increment financing or that type of resource. Even the HUD 108 dollars, I don't think we've done any additional hotel financing with those types of resources since that time. I certainly think going forward in terms of how and over the recent years, how we select projects for support is very much focused on what is the benefit that those projects are going to bring to the community. That absolutely includes looking at the quality of jobs, looking at the wages, looking at the benefits, and evaluating what other benefits the project is going to bring to a community. It might be other types of things, medical services.
So could I be more specific? I know wages, as you evaluate kind of the value of a company and what it can overall bring, but or an investment project and what it can actually bring to the city. It's not just that wages are part of the evaluation, but are wages a responsibility of a mandate of the investment? You must be able to pay X amount of dollars. Is that currently part of your requirement? Yes or no?
For specifically the new markets tax credits, yes.
Okay. And what is that wage then? So
the wage is based on a calculator. Let's see. Let me just look this up. So we require our new markets borrowers to comply with a community benefits agreement that defines a living wage that is consistent with a calculator that is run by MIT. And that current living wage calculation is $12.64 an hour, or $26,291 for 2020.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's considered a living wage?
So that is consistent with this MIT living wage calculator that is the standard that we have applied to date with these community benefits agreements.
And that's generally the standard across all your projects? So like Ensemble or Mosaic, the one that you're doing at the Navy Yard would employ that threshold?
So that is not, so the living wage calculation here is specific for the New Markets Tax Credit Program. We have not developed a specific wage-related mandate, I guess you would say, for other types of projects outside of that.
Okay. I think it should be part of your consideration. You know, like as I said, I think for entities that are getting, you know, $6-7 million, 6-7 figure kind of investments with public tax dollars, our responsibility is to raise wages and to recognize that the city itself is moving towards $15 an hour as a minimum wage for publicly city-funded subsidized projects. And I feel that PIDC has to be part of that dialogue. I think that there are other things that, you know, I still want to continue to have conversations and hope that the pre-COVID recovery, you know, pre-COVID and post-COVID is dramatically different for us. We've seen devastation across our city on small businesses, and the investment, you know, supports and what we can do with scarce dollars right now really, you know, should lean towards a very generous view towards community growth. Beyond it, ownership is absolutely key. Hiring jobs, absolutely key. But I think we've shown us, you know, and I think you've actually shown a real investment around public sector, private sector partnerships that can meet both a meaningful threshold on wages and community benefits, as well as a large scale primarily privately developed project can do, and sometimes even better. So, to be continued, but thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Gim. Is there any other questions or comments from members of council? Are there any other witnesses that are here to testify on this resolution for these joint committees? Seeing none, thank you, Sylvie Guy-Howard, our Acting Commerce Director, and Ann Bavere-Nevins from PIDC for your testimony this afternoon. I want to thank all the members of council and all the people that testified today, especially those of you who are virtual teachers as well as participants in this hearing, something I can definitely relate to myself. This was a great conversation, provides some additional information regarding the work we're seeing at the state level, as well as work that we are doing with our Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce, and as well as with Commerce and PIDC as we continue to move forward to help our small businesses that have been crippled by this COVID pandemic, which has also caused an economic crisis. Seeing no other comments from members of council or the public, there being no further questions from members of the committee and no other witnesses to testify, I've already asked if anyone else is present in this hearing that I failed to call upon that wishes to offer testimony on this resolution. Seeing none, I want to thank all of you for your participation today. We value your opinions. And this concludes the public hearing of this Joint Committee on Finance and Commerce Economic Development. We shall recess this hearing to the call of the chair. Thank you for your participation and attendance this morning and now this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.